The only sound in the laboratory was the gentle, rhythmic hum of the cryogenic freezers, a sound as constant and soothing to Anna Ivanova as the beating of her own heart. It was a sound layered with the software of ventilation fans and the almost imperceptible click and chatter of the DNA sequencer in the far corner, working tirelessly through the night. To an outsider, the room would have felt sterile, cold, an antiseptic white and steel cavern of soulless machinery. But to Anna, it was a sanctuary. It was the only place on Earth where she felt entirely, unequivocally herself. Here, in her subterranean kingdom 3 floors beneath the sprawling campus of the National Research Institute, she was not Anyusha, the quiet, socially awkward daughter. She was not the disappointing sister who, at 32, still dressed in practical sweaters and had never brought a man home for dinner. Here, she was an architect of miracles. Her world was the luminous glow of the 6 monitors arranged in a gentle semicircle around her workstation. They were not showing emails or social media feeds. They were displaying life itself, translated into a language she understood better than her native tongue. Cascading strings of genetic code, colored in vibrant blues, greens, and reds, flowed down one screen like a digital waterfall. On another, a complex, 3-dimensional protein model rotated slowly in virtual space, a tangle of helices and ribbons that held the key to a cure for a dozen hereditary diseases. This was her symphony, the grand opera of her life's work, and she was its sole composer and conductor. Her fingers moved with quiet, practiced efficiency across the keyboard, entering a long string of commands. A simulation began to run on the central monitor, modeling the interaction of a synthetic RNA strand with a target gene sequence. She leaned forward, her chin resting on her hand, her gray eyes, so often described by her family as dreamy or distracted, now sharp with an almost predatory focus. She saw not abstract data, but a battle being waged on a microscopic scale. She saw a tiny, elegant weapon of her own design preparing to excise a fatal flaw from the very blueprint of a human being. This was Project Genesis, and it was nearly complete. The chime of the service elevator arriving at her level was a discordant note in her symphony. It was an intrusion from the world above, the world of timetables and meetings and people. Anna rarely had visitors. The security clearance for this level was higher than that for the Institute's director's office. Only a handful of people were even aware of the lab's existence, let alone had access. The elevator doors hissed open, and a young security guard, David, a fresh-faced kid who looked barely out of his teens, stood holding a single, oversized envelope. He looked nervous, as he always did when delivering something to the sealed doors of Lab 03. "Sorry to disturb you, Dr. Ivanova," he said, his voice respectful, almost reverent. The younger staff, the ones who only knew her as the mysterious figure who commanded this high-tech fortress, treated her like a minor deity. It was a stark contrast to her own family. This came by special courier. Marked urgent. Director Levin's office said to bring it to you directly. Anna swiped her keycard, and a section of the reinforced glass door slid open with a pneumatic sigh. "Thank you, David." She took the envelope. It was surprisingly heavy, made of thick, cream-colored cardstock that felt alien and decadent in her practical, calloused hands. Her name was written on the front in exquisite, flowing calligraphy, Dr. Anna Ivanova. In the top left corner, an embossed crest gleamed under the cool LED lights of the corridor, the official seal of the International Science and Innovation Foundation. She closed the door, the lock clicking shut with a heavy finality, sealing her back inside her world. She placed the envelope on the one clear space on her workbench, next to a schematic for a microfluidic chip. For a long moment, she just stared at it. It felt like a foreign object, a relic from a parallel universe she had long ago chosen to abandon. It represented everything she had run from: formal events, polite conversation, social hierarchies, and the crushing weight of her family's judgment. With a sigh, she slid it open with a spare scalpel. Inside was a single, thick invitation card. Gold leaf lettering glittered against the rich, dark blue background. The Board of Governors of the International Science and Innovation Foundation requests the honor of your presence at the annual awards gala. Her eyes scanned the text, her mind automatically filtering the florid language. It was this Saturday. The main ballroom of the Grand Metropole Hotel. A celebration of the year's greatest achievements in science and technology. Her stomach tightened. She knew this event. Her father, Professor Viktor Ivanov, a man whose reputation in theoretical physics was as grand as his opinion of himself, never missed it. It was his hunting ground, the place he went to network with deans and funders, reinforcing his status as a pillar of the academic community. Her brother, Dmitri, the celebrated cardiac surgeon with a smile as sharp as his instruments, would be there too, effortlessly charming and basking in the reflected glory of their father's name. And they would expect her to be in her lab, or at her small, quiet apartment. They would expect her to be Anyusha, the family's resident oddity, the brilliant girl who had somehow failed to launch. Her first, overwhelming instinct was to toss the invitation into the biohazard disposal bin. The thought of walking into that ballroom was physically nauseating. She could already picture the scene. She would find her father holding court, a circle of admirers hanging on his every word about quantum entanglement or the multiverse. He would spot her across the room, and a look of pained surprise would cross his face, followed by that familiar, pitying smile. "Anya, what a surprise. Getting some fresh air, are we?" he would say, his voice booming for all to hear. He would pat her shoulder, a gesture that was supposed to look affectionate but always felt like a public branding of her as the family disappointment. He would introduce her to his colleagues with a carefully worded phrase, "This is my daughter, Anna. She helps out at the institute. Very dedicated." The words hung in the air, unspoken but understood by all. "She's not like us. She's the strange one. Please, don't judge us by her." Then there would be Dmitri. He would glide over, effortlessly handsome in his designer's suit, a glass of champagne in hand. He would kiss her cheek and murmur, "Anyusha, what are you doing here? You look lost. Did you get tired of your petri dishes?" It would be said with a laugh, a joke meant to include her, but the subtext was always clear. "You don't belong here. This is our world. Go back to yours." He would critique her simple dress, her lack of makeup, her inability to make small talk. He did it all out of a professed sense of brotherly concern, which made it all the more cruel. He wasn't trying to be mean. He simply, genuinely, believed she needed his guidance to navigate a world for which she was so obviously ill-equipped. The worst part was that, for a long time, she had believed them. Their perception of her had been a cage, its bars forged from their low expectations and polished with their condescending love. They saw a shy, awkward girl, so they treated her as one, and for years, she had contorted herself to fit that mold. She had let them believe her work was a minor, technical role because it was easier than facing the blank, uncomprehending stares when she tried to explain what she actually did. How could she explain the sublime beauty of a perfectly executed gene-splicing algorithm to a father who thought her work was a cute hobby and a brother who thought her lab was just a place she went to hide from life? She remembered, with a fresh pang of a very old wound, the last time she had tried. It was years ago. She had just finalized the theoretical framework for Project Genesis. Shaking with an excitement so profound it felt like a fever, she had driven to the family home for their traditional Sunday dinner. She had brought her laptop, filled with diagrams and predictive models. "Father, Dima, I have to show you something," she had begun, her voice trembling. I think I've solved the delivery problem." Dmitri had been busy showing off photos of his new Audi on his phone. "The what problem? Did you forget your keys again, Anyusha? You can borrow my car if you need it." Her father had been more patient, but infinitely more dismissive. He had peered at her complex equations through his reading glasses. "Ah, very ambitious, my dear. Very imaginative. But the cellular uptake barriers are immense. Some of the greatest minds at MIT have been working on this for years. It's a noble endeavor, of course, but perhaps a bit out of reach for, well, it's a difficult field. Now, who wants more wine?" He had closed her laptop with a gentle, final click, and in that sound, she had heard the closing of a door. He had not seen her work. He had seen his daughter, the dreamer, playing with ideas far too big for her. That night, she had gone back to her lab, deleted every family photo from her workstation, and built a wall around her world, brick by silent, solitary brick. So why was she even hesitating now? Why hadn't the invitation already been incinerated? Her eyes fell upon a name at the bottom of the card, listed under the honorary committee. Professor Mikhail Orlov. A warmth spread through her chest, a stark contrast to the cold dread that had gripped her moments before. Professor Orlov. Her mentor. The man who had been the head of the genetics department when she was just a nervous, wide-eyed undergraduate. He was a gnarled, brilliant, fiercely compassionate man who had seen something in her that no one else had, not even she herself. While her father was praising Dmitri for acing his anatomy exams, Orlov was pulling her aside in the hallway to argue with her about the ethical implications of her term paper on CRISPR technology. He hadn't seen a cute hobby. He had seen a mind. She remembered him defending her in front of a dismissive tenure committee when she applied for her first research grant. "You see a quiet student," he had thundered, his voice echoing in the state boardroom. "I see a mind that is about to remap the boundaries of our field." To deny her this funding would not be a disservice to her. It would be a crime against the future of science. They had given her the grant, and with it, she had built this lab, her sanctuary. Orloff was old now, retired and in frail health. She hadn't seen him in over a year, but his name on that card was a summons. It was a call from the one person in that entire, glittering world who knew who she truly was. To ignore the invitation would be to dishonor him. It would be a betrayal of the one man who had never once made her feel small. A new feeling began to displace the dread. It was a slow, rising tide of something hard and defiant. For years, she had hidden. She had accepted their narrative, allowed them to define her reality. She had let them believe she was a failure to spare herself the pain of their disbelief. But what if she was tired of hiding? What if she was tired of protecting them from a truth they were too blind to see? She looked around her lab, at the silent, powerful machines that answered her every command, at the glowing screens displaying a future she was single-handedly writing into existence. This was her truth. This was her power. It was not loud or flashy like Dmitri's surgical triumphs, or abstract and philosophical like her father's theories. It was quiet, immense, and real. It was going to change the world. A decision crystallized in her mind, solid and clear as a diamond. She would go. She would not go as Anyusha, the awkward sister. She would go as Dr. Anna Ivanova. She would walk into that ballroom, into their world, not as an intruder, but as a sovereign visiting a foreign land. She would not argue with them. She would not try to explain. She would simply be. And she would let the universe handle the rest. She picked up the heavy, embossed invitation. For the first time, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a key. A key to a door she had long kept locked. And she realized, with a sudden, sharp intake of breath, that she was finally ready to see what was on the other side. The Grand Metropole Hotel was a monument to old-world opulence, a place where time seemed to slow down and money was an unspoken language. Its grand, columned entrance was a portal, separating the mundane chaos of the city from a realm of polished marble, hushed tones, and the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. As Anna stepped out of the taxi, the cold night air clinging to her skin, she felt the familiar, gravitational pull of the building, the weight of expectation, the pressure of a world she had never quite managed to inhabit. She had chosen her armor for the evening with meticulous care. It was not armor in the traditional sense. There were no sequins, no vibrant colors, no daring cuts. Her dress was a simple, impeccably tailored sheath of midnight blue silk. It was a color that absorbed light rather than reflected it, designed for quiet elegance, not for drawing attention. It had no famous designer label, and it had commissioned it from a small, independent couturier who specialized in creating garments for professional women who valued structure and form over fleeting trends. The dress was a statement of quiet confidence, its value lying in its perfect fit and the subtle, luxurious whisper of its fabric, a message intended for herself alone. She wore no jewelry, save for a pair of small, discreet pearl earrings, a gift from Professor Orloff upon the publication of her doctoral thesis. Her hair was pulled back into a simple, elegant chignon, and her face was almost bare of makeup. She was not here to compete. She was here to observe. As she ascended the wide, red-carpeted steps, the muffled sound of a string quartet and the gentle hum of hundreds of conversations drifted out to greet her. But before she could reach the heavy, ornate doors, two figures emerged from the dazzling light of the lobby, blocking her path. They were like sentinels guarding the gates of another reality, and for a heart-stopping moment, Anna felt the irrational urge to turn and flee. It was her father and brother. Professor Viktor Ivanov stood at his full, imposing height, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his tuxedo tailored to accentuate the broad shoulders and patrician bearing that had commanded lecture halls for 3 decades. He exuded an aura of unshakable intellectual authority. Beside him, Dmitri was a study in modern success. His suit was a darker, more fashionable cut, his smile was bright and easy, and his watch, a gleaming silver chronometer, caught the light as he gestured to someone inside. They were a portrait of accomplishment, the living embodiment of the Ivanov name. Dmitri spotted her first. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a barely perceptible flicker of surprise before it was replaced by an expression of amused disbelief. "Anya," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the ambient noise. He strode toward her, his movement smooth and confident. "What on earth are you doing here?" Did you get lost on your way to the library? His words were light, framed as a joke, but the underlying message was as sharp and cold as a scalpel's edge. You do not belong. Her father turned, his gaze following Dimitri's. The reaction was slower, more complex. First, confusion, as his brain struggled to place his daughter in this unexpected context. Then, a shadow of something that looked remarkably like disappointment, or perhaps embarrassment, passed over his features before he schooled them into a mask of paternal concern. Anna, he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that could make the most trivial statements sound like a profound axiom. He walked over to stand beside Dimitri, the two of them forming an unintentional but formidable wall. This is a surprise. A pleasant one, of course, but a surprise. The word pleasant was delivered with the same forced enthusiasm one might use upon receiving a pair of socks for Christmas. I have an invitation, Anna said simply, her voice quieter than she would have liked. The cold air seemed to have stolen its volume. She held up her clutch, a simple, unadorned leather piece that contained her phone, her keycard, and the heavy cardstock invitation. Dimitri let out a soft laugh, shaking his head as if dealing with a particularly charming but foolish child. An invitation? Anyusha, this is the ISIF gala. It's a closed event. For the people who are shaping the future of the field. He gestured vaguely toward the glittering lobby behind him. Donors, department heads, laureates. I think there must have been a mistake in the mailing list. There was no mistake, Anna replied, her resolve hardening at his condescending tone. It was addressed to me. Perhaps it was a courtesy invitation sent to all institute staff, her father interjected, his voice smooth and placating, as if trying to gently correct a misunderstanding without causing a scene. A very nice gesture on their part. But attendance, it's not really expected of junior personnel. The ticket price alone is quite steep, you know. The ticket price. Anna knew the price to the exact cent. The institute had, at her anonymous direction through Dr. Levin, purchased 3 full tables for the event to host promising young researchers and graduate students who could not otherwise afford to attend. Her ticket was effectively paying for half the people in the room. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. I can afford it, she stated, looking directly at her father. Victor's eyebrows rose slightly. He exchanged a quick, meaningful glance with Dimitri. It was a look Anna knew well. It was their silent, shared language, a communication that always excluded her. It said, she's being difficult. Let's handle this gently. Darling, that's not what I meant, her father said, his voice softening into the familiar tone of a patient adult explaining a complex concept to a child. It's not just about the money. It's about context. This is a professional environment, a place for networking, for building relationships. You don't know anyone here. You'd be terribly uncomfortable. I know Professor Orloff, Anna countered. The name is Shield and a sword. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed her father's face. Orloff? Of course, a giant in his day. But he's retired now, Anna. Very frail. I doubt he'll even be here tonight. And even if he is, you can't spend the whole evening clinging to one old man. She's not clinging to anyone, Dimitri said, stepping forward and lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, as if letting her in on a secret. Look, Anya, let me be straight with you. Dad is just trying to be polite. This isn't your scene. People here are intense. They talk business. They talk grants, funding rounds, clinical trials. You'll be bored to tears in 5 minutes. Why don't you go home, put on a movie, and I'll call you tomorrow. We can get brunch. My treat. It was the perfect encapsulation of their dynamic. He, the successful, worldly brother, offering a small treat, a consolation prize, to his simple, out-of-her-depth sister. He wasn't being malicious. In his mind, he was being kind. He was saving her from an evening of social humiliation. I'm not leaving, Anna said, her voice finally finding its strength. It came out colder and sharper than she intended. Dimitri's smile tightened. The mask of amused patience was beginning to crack. Don't be stubborn, Anya. You're going to embarrass yourself. You're going to embarrass us. The word hung in the air between them. Embarrass. That was the core of it. Her very presence, in her simple dress and her quiet demeanor, was a potential stain on their carefully polished family image. She was the anomaly, the variable that didn't fit their equation of success. How, exactly, would I embarrass you? She asked, her curiosity genuine. Look at you, Dimitri said, his gesture taking in her entire appearance. It wasn't a hostile gesture, but a clinical, diagnostic one, like a surgeon assessing a problem. That dress, it's very plain. People here are wearing Valentino, Dior. And you haven't even tried with your hair. You look like you just came from the library. I like my dress, Anna said calmly. And I did just come from the library. The Institute's digital research library. I was running final simulations. Her father sighed, a deep, weary sound of parental exasperation. Anna, please. Your brother is right. This isn't the time or the place for your projects. This is a night to celebrate real, tangible achievements. The people in this room have changed the world. Or, at the very least, they've secured the multi-million-dollar grants to do so. He delivered the line with a wry smile, a bit of academic humor that Dmitri chuckled at appreciatively. The irony was now so thick, so suffocating, Anna felt she might choke on it. The grant that had funded her entire subterranean lab, the largest private research grant in the Institute's history, had been approved by a committee that her father himself had chaired. The final proposal had been submitted anonymously, under the codename Geneticist, to avoid political bias. Anna remembered her father coming home from the final review meeting, buzzing with excitement. You wouldn't believe the proposal that crossed my desk today, he had announced at dinner. Absolutely brilliant. Ambitious, audacious, but flawlessly reasoned. I don't know who this researcher is, but they are going to redefine modern medicine. This is what I call true science. He had been praising her. He had been championing her work, unknowingly securing her future, while simultaneously lamenting his own daughter's lack of ambition. The memory was so bizarre, so painful, that Anna felt a dizzying sense of disconnect from reality. I understand, she said, her voice a hollow echo of the turmoil inside her. Good, Victor said, patting her arm, clearly misinterpreting her words as acquiescence. I knew you would. You're a smart girl. You understand your limitations. My limitations. The phrase struck her with the force of a physical blow. Her limitations were, in their eyes, her defining characteristic. Now, run along, Dmitri said, his good humor restored now that the crisis had been averted. He pulled out his wallet. Here. He tried to press a few large bills into her hand. Take this. For the taxi. And get yourself something nice tomorrow. A new dress, maybe. Something with a bit more life to it. Anna looked down at the money in his hand, then back up at his smiling, handsome face. And in that moment, something inside her snapped. It was not a loud, dramatic break, but a quiet, clean fracture. The final, slender thread of her desire for their approval, for their understanding, simply ceased to exist. She did not take the money. She did not move. She just stood there, on the steps of the Grand Metropole Hotel, and looked at these two men who shared her blood but not her reality. She saw them, suddenly, with a terrifying clarity. She saw their ambition, their pride, their deep-seated fear of mediocrity. And she saw the box they had built for her, a box labeled disappointment, and how they had mistaken that box for the person inside it. You're wrong, she said, and her voice was no longer quiet. It was clear, calm, and resonant, cutting through the cold night air with the precision of a laser. You were wrong about my dress. You were wrong about my work. You were wrong about my limitations. And you were wrong about me. She took a step forward, directly between them, breaking their physical and symbolic wall. She did not push. She did not shove. She simply moved into the space they had denied her, an act of quiet, unshakable assertion. For a moment, they were too stunned to react. They just stared as she walked past them, her simple blue dress a slash of midnight against the brilliant gold of the lobby doors. She reached the entrance, where a uniformed doorman, seeing her approach, pulled the heavy door open for her. Just as she was about to step inside, her father found his voice. Anna, wait, he called out, a note of genuine alarm in his tone. You can't just walk in there. They won't let you pass the receiving line without a sponsor. Anna paused in the doorway, half in the cold darkness of her past, half in the warm, bright light of her present. She turned her head slightly, looking back at him over her shoulder. A small, genuine smile finally touched her lips. It was not a smile of triumph or of malice. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated freedom. Don't worry, father, she said, her voice carrying back to them, clear and serene. I'm not looking for a sponsor. And with that, she stepped across the threshold, leaving them behind on the cold steps, two statues of disbelief silhouetted against the unforgiving night. She was no longer entering their world. She was inviting them into hers. The moment Anna stepped across the threshold, the world changed. The cold, critical air of the street was replaced by a warm, fragrant atmosphere, thick with the scents of expensive perfume, hothouse flowers, and the subtle, buttery aroma of fine champagne. The muted hum she had heard from outside resolved into a complex symphony of human interaction, the clinking of crystal glasses, the murmur of 100 conversations blending into a sophisticated roar, and the soaring, elegant notes of a Mozart string quartet weaving through it all. The lobby of the Grand Metropole was a cavern of gilded splendor. A colossal chandelier, a dripping cascade of crystal and light, hung from a frescoed ceiling 3 stories above. Light glinted off polished marble floors, burnished brass fixtures, and the sequins and jewels adorning the guests. It was a room designed to impress, to intimidate, to remind all who entered of their place in the grand hierarchy. For most of her life, a room like this would have made Anna feel like a microbe under a microscope, small, insignificant, and painfully exposed. But tonight was different. As her eyes adjusted to the brilliance, she felt a strange sense of calm descend upon her. She was no longer a participant desperate for acceptance. She was an anthropologist observing the customs of a foreign tribe. She saw the tribe's people clearly. They were clustered in small, shifting constellations, their orbits dictated by invisible gravities of power and influence. There were the academics, identifiable by their slightly ill-fitting tuxedos and their tendency to gesticulate wildly while arguing about esoteric theories. There were the corporate executives, sleek and predatory in their perfectly tailored suits, their eyes constantly scanning the room for opportunities or rivals. There were the philanthropists, older and adorned with understated but staggeringly expensive jewelry, radiating an aura of serene, unassailable wealth. And weaving between them all were the ambitious young researchers and postdocs, their faces a mixture of awe, terror, and desperate hope. For a moment, she was invisible, just another woman in a simple dress on the periphery of the swirling galaxy of guests. She used the moment to scan the room, not for her father or brother, but for Professor Orloff. A pang of disappointment hit her when she didn't see him. Perhaps her father had been right. Perhaps he had been too frail to attend. The thought was a small, cold stone in the pit of her stomach. The one friendly face she had hoped to find in this sea of strangers was absent. Her father and brother entered the ballroom behind her, their faces grim. They moved with a purpose, their eyes scanning the crowd. Anna knew they were looking for her, ready to make one last attempt to manage the situation, to mitigate the damage of her inexplicable defiance. To avoid another confrontation, she slipped behind a large marble pillar, the cool stone a welcome anchor in the overwhelming sensory environment. From her concealed vantage point, she could watch them, and she could listen. Victor and Dmitri quickly found their social footing. They were absorbed into a cluster of academics from the university's physics department. Anna watched as her father's demeanor transformed. The paternal frustration he had shown her outside melted away, replaced by his public persona, the charming, erudite intellectual. He laughed, a deep, resonant sound, at a colleague's joke. He placed a hand on the shoulder of a university dean, his expression one of grave sincerity as they discussed university politics. Dmitri, too, was in his element. He was quickly surrounded by a group of fellow medical professionals, including the renowned Dr. Alistair Finch, the head of surgery at the city's most prestigious hospital. Dmitri spoke with an easy, confident animation, his hands moving to emphasize a point about a new surgical technique. He was charming, handsome, and brilliant. He was everything their father had ever wanted in a son. He was the sun, and Anna, by extension, was the forgotten, distant moon. From her hiding place, Anna could catch snippets of their conversations, fragments that painted a vivid picture of their world, and her place, or lack thereof, within it. "Victor, wonderful to see you," a portly, balding man in a tight tuxedo exclaimed, clapping her father on the back. "I was just telling Dean Holloway that your latest paper on holographic principles was paradigm-shifting." "Truly, you're too kind, Marcus," her father replied, his voice a smooth blend of humility and pride. "It's merely a theoretical framework. The real work, the tangible work, is being done by the next generation." He gestured toward Dmitri, who was now laughing with Dr. Finch. "My son, Dmitri, for instance. He's pioneering a new minimally invasive valve replacement. Saving lives, not just scribbling equations. He's the real scientist in the family." The comment was a familiar one, a well-worn piece of paternal pride that Anna had heard 100 times. But tonight, it landed differently. It was not just a slight, it was a profound, staggering falsehood. A little while later, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. 2 women, elegantly dressed and dripping with diamonds, stood near her pillar, their voices low and conspiratorial. They were the wives of prominent venture capitalists, and their gossip was a currency more valuable than gold. Did you hear the latest rumor about Project Genesis? The first woman, a redhead with a surgically perfected face, whispered. The gene therapy thing? I heard FarmCorp is trying to get in on the ground floor. The second, a statuesque blonde, replied. My husband says the analyst reports are insane. They're saying it's bigger than the discovery of penicillin, that it could effectively end hereditary disease as we know it. Bigger than that, the redhead said, her eyes wide. I heard the lead scientist is a complete enigma. No one knows who they are. Utterly anonymous. They say they're a recluse, some kind of eccentric genius who works in a secret underground lab. Howard Hughes with a PhD. Can you imagine? The person who holds the key to immortality, and no one has ever seen their face. Anna had to press her hand against the cold marble to steady herself. Howard Hughes with a PhD. The description was so wildly inaccurate, yet so eerily close to the mythology that had been constructed around her anonymity, that she felt a wave of profound dislocation. They were talking about her. They were whispering about her ghost, her legend, while she stood 3 feet away, utterly invisible to them. Her attention was drawn back to her father's group. He was now in deep conversation with a man Anna recognized instantly, Carl Steiner, the formidable CEO of FarmCorp. Steiner was a man whose ambition was matched only by his ruthlessness. He was short, impeccably dressed, with cold, reptilian eyes that seemed to assess the value of everything and everyone they landed on. He was the man Anna had spent the last 6 months negotiating with through a firewall of lawyers and intermediaries. He had tried, through every legal and financial maneuver imaginable, to gain a controlling interest in her patents. He was, in many ways, her greatest adversary. Professor Ivanov, Steiner said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble with a faint German accent. A pleasure. Your work on quantum gravity is foundational. Mr. Steiner, her father replied, his voice filled with a respect that bordered on reverence. This was the pinnacle of the scientific world, where pure research met immense commercial power. The honor is all mine. Your company's commitment to advancing medical science is an inspiration to us all. Steiner gave a thin, dismissive smile. We do what we can, but we are merely developers. The true geniuses are the ones in the labs, the unknown soldiers. Speaking of which, he leaned in slightly, his voice dropping, your institute is the talk of the town. This project, Genesis, it is the most significant development I have seen in my 40-year career. The mind behind it is a ghost, a phantom. We have tried to open a direct line of communication, but we are met with a wall of lawyers. You are a senior fellow, a man of influence. Surely you must have some idea who this person is. Anna held her breath. Her father was being presented with the ultimate test. Viktor Ivanov drew himself up, a look of thoughtful authority on his face. He stroked his chin, a gesture he always used when formulating a particularly impressive-sounding opinion. It is a closely guarded secret, of course, he said, his tone suggesting he was privy to information far beyond that of a common mortal. The Institute believes in protecting its assets, but the scuttlebutt in the senior commons is that it is likely a team, probably led by someone from outside our circles. Perhaps a defector from a rival program at Caltech, or even someone brought over from the Max Planck Institute. Someone with a proven track record, a seasoned veteran. He paused, a self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. One thing is certain, however, he declared with absolute conviction. Whoever they are undoubtedly a man of singular, uncompromising vision. This is not the work of a committee. It is the work of a titan, a man. The word was a final, casual erasure. In her father's mind, a titan of science, a ghost of unimaginable genius, could only be a man. The possibility that this singular, visionary mind could belong to his own daughter was not just unlikely. It was, in the fundamental physics of his worldview, impossible. The pain of it was sharp and clean, like a paper cut. It was not a gaping wound, but a small, stinging reminder of a lifetime of being underestimated, of being so fundamentally misread. She pushed herself away from the pillar, the need for air suddenly overwhelming. She began to walk, moving along the periphery of the room, a ghost in her own right. She passed clusters of people, their conversations washing over her, a tide of ambition and ego. The grant proposal was rejected. They said our methodology was unsound. He stole my research, published it under his own name. I'm taking him to court. If we can just get through the Phase 2 trials, the IPO will make us all wealthy beyond our wildest dreams. It was a world of sharp elbows and fragile egos, a world she had deliberately cordoned herself off from. Her lab was a sanctuary not just from her family, but from this, the relentless, grinding politics of professional science. She found herself near the grand, sweeping staircase that led to the mezzanine level. And there, standing at its base, was Dmitri. He was no longer with his medical colleagues. He was talking to a young, beautiful woman in a shimmering gold dress. It was Dr. Eris Thorne, a brilliant neuroscientist who had recently joined the institute. Anna knew her work. It was elegant and insightful. She also knew that Dmitri had been pursuing her, unsuccessfully, for months. He was laying on the charm, his smile dazzling, his posture relaxed and confident. But Dr. Thorne looked distracted, her eyes scanning the crowd over Dmitri's shoulder. And so I told the chief of staff, if you want the best, you have to be willing to pay for the best equipment, Dmitri was saying, recounting some tale of hospital politics. That's fascinating, Dmitri, Dr. Thorne said, her smile polite but strained. Excuse me for a moment. I thought I saw someone. Her eyes swept the room, and, for a heart-stopping second, they locked with Anna's. A look of pure, unadulterated shock crossed Dr. Thorne's face, followed by something that looked like awe. She immediately excused herself from a perplexed Dmitri and began to move toward Anna with a sense of urgent purpose. Anna's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't know Dr. Thorne personally, but Dr. Thorne clearly knew who she was. The carefully constructed wall of her anonymity was about to be breached, not by her family, but by a professional peer. Before Dr. Thorne could reach her, however, Dmitri intercepted her. He had seen the direction of her gaze and, putting two and two together and arriving at a spectacularly wrong answer, he moved to block her path to Anna. Eris, wait, he said, his voice laced with a pained, brotherly protectiveness. I should probably explain about my sister. He led the confused neuroscientist a few feet away, his back to Anna, but his voice carried clearly in the cavernous space. She's a bit overwhelmed, Dmitri explained in a low, confidential tone. She's not used to this sort of thing. She's very bright, of course, but not very practical. She works in one of the Institute's support labs. A bit of a recluse. To be honest, I'm not sure why she even came tonight. I think she might be having some sort of episode. I'm terribly sorry if she was staring or made you uncomfortable. He was creating a narrative, a plausible explanation for her presence, one that painted him as the concerned, responsible brother and her as the fragile, unstable sister who needed to be managed. He was building a wall of contempt and pity around her, brick by well-intentioned, devastating brick. And Dr. Eris Thorne, a woman whose entire career was based on her ability to analyze complex neural networks, simply stared at him, her mouth slightly agape, as if he had started speaking in tongues. The disconnect between the man she was hearing and the legendary scientist she had been trying to meet for months was so vast, so complete, that her brilliant mind was momentarily paralyzed by the sheer, baffling absurdity of it all. Anna watched the scene unfold, a silent, invisible ghost observing a play written about her, in which she had been cast as a madwoman in the attic. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the quiet life she had so carefully constructed was about to end. The whispers were about to become a roar. The moment Anna stepped across the threshold, the world changed. The cold, critical air of the street was replaced by a warm, fragrant atmosphere, thick with the scents of expensive perfume, hothouse flowers, and the subtle, buttery aroma of fine champagne. The muted hum she had heard from outside resolved into a complex symphony of human interaction. The clinking of crystal glasses, the murmur of 100 conversations blending into a sophisticated roar, and the soaring, elegant notes of a Mozart string quartet weaving through it all. The lobby of the Grand Metropole was a cavern of gilded splendor. A colossal chandelier, a dripping cascade of crystal and light, hung from a frescoed ceiling 3 stories above. Light glinted off polished marble floors, burnished brass fixtures, and the sequins and jewels adorning the guests. It was a room designed to impress, to intimidate, to remind all who entered of their place in the grand hierarchy. For most of her life, a room like this would have made Anna feel like a microbe under a microscope, small, insignificant, and painfully exposed. But tonight was different. As her eyes adjusted to the brilliance, she felt a strange sense of calm descend upon her. She was no longer a participant desperate for acceptance. She was an anthropologist observing the customs of a foreign tribe. She saw the tribe's people clearly. They were clustered in small, shifting constellations, their orbits dictated by invisible gravities of power and influence. There were the academics, identifiable by their slightly ill-fitting tuxedos and their tendency to gesticulate wildly while arguing about esoteric theories. There were the corporate executives, sleek and predatory in their perfectly tailored suits, their eyes constantly scanning the room for opportunities or rivals. There were the philanthropists, older and adorned with understated but staggeringly expensive jewelry, radiating an aura of serene, unassailable wealth. And weaving between them all were the ambitious young researchers and postdocs, their faces a mixture of awe, terror, and desperate hope. For a moment, she was invisible, just another woman in a simple dress on the periphery of the swirling galaxy of guests. She used the moment to scan the room, not for her father or brother, but for Professor Orloff. A pang of disappointment hit her when she didn't see him. Perhaps her father had been right. Perhaps he had been too frail to attend. The thought was a small, cold stone in the pit of her stomach. The one friendly face she had hoped to find in this sea of strangers was absent. Her father and brother entered the ballroom behind her, their faces grim. They moved with a purpose, their eyes scanning the crowd. Anna knew they were looking for her, ready to make one last attempt to manage the situation, to mitigate the damage of her inexplicable defiance. To avoid another confrontation, she slipped behind a large marble pillar, the cool stone a welcome anchor in the overwhelming sensory environment. From her concealed vantage point, she could watch them, and she could listen. Victor and Dmitri quickly found their social footing. They were absorbed into a cluster of academics from the university's physics department. Anna watched as her father's demeanor transformed. The paternal frustration he had shown her outside melted away, replaced by his public persona, the charming, erudite intellectual. He laughed, a deep, resonant sound, at a colleague's joke. He placed a hand on the shoulder of a university dean, his expression one of grave sincerity as they discussed university politics. Dmitri, too, was in his element. He was quickly surrounded by a group of fellow medical professionals, including the renowned Dr. Alistair Finch, the head of surgery at the city's most prestigious hospital. Dmitri spoke with an easy, confident animation, his hands moving to emphasize a point about a new surgical technique. He was charming, handsome, and brilliant. He was everything their father had ever wanted in a son. He was the sun, and Anna, by extension, was the forgotten, distant moon. From her hiding place, Anna could catch snippets of their conversations, fragments that painted a vivid picture of their world and her place, or lack thereof, within it. "Victor, wonderful to see you," a portly, balding man in a tight tuxedo exclaimed, clapping her father on the back. "I was just telling Dean Holloway that your latest paper on holographic principles was paradigm shifting." "Truly, you're too kind, Marcus," her father replied, his voice a smooth blend of humility and pride. "It's merely a theoretical framework. The real work, the tangible work, is being done by the next generation." He gestured toward Dmitri, who was now laughing with Dr. Finch. "My son, Dmitri, for instance. He's pioneering a new minimally invasive valve replacement. Saving lives, not just scribbling equations. He's the real scientist in the family." The comment was a familiar one, a well-worn piece of paternal pride that Anna had heard 100 times. But tonight, it landed differently. It was not just a slight. It was a profound, staggering falsehood. A little while later, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Two women, elegantly dressed and dripping with diamonds, stood near her pillar, their voices low and conspiratorial. They were the wives of prominent venture capitalists, and their gossip was a currency more valuable than gold. "Did you hear the latest rumor about Project Genesis?" The first woman, a redhead with a surgically perfected face, whispered. "The gene therapy thing? I heard FarmCorp is trying to get in on the ground floor." The second, a statuesque blonde, replied. "My husband says the analyst reports are insane. They're saying it's bigger than the discovery of penicillin, that it could effectively end hereditary disease as we know it." "Bigger than that," the redhead said, her eyes wide. "I heard the lead scientist is a complete enigma. No one knows who they are. Utterly anonymous. They say they're a recluse, some kind of eccentric genius who works in a secret underground lab. Howard Hughes with a PhD. Can you imagine? The person who holds the key to immortality, and no one has ever seen their face." Anna had to press her hand against the cold marble to steady herself. Howard Hughes with a PhD. The description was so wildly inaccurate, yet so eerily close to the mythology that had been constructed around her anonymity that she felt a wave of profound dislocation. They were talking about her. They were whispering about her ghost, her legend, while she stood 3 feet away, utterly invisible to them. Her attention was drawn back to her father's group. He was now in deep conversation with a man Anna recognized instantly, Carl Steiner, the formidable CEO of FarmCorp. Steiner was a man whose ambition was matched only by his ruthlessness. He was short, impeccably dressed, with cold, reptilian eyes that seemed to assess the value of everything and everyone they landed on. He was the man Anna had spent the last 6 months negotiating with through a firewall of lawyers and intermediaries. He had tried, through every legal and financial maneuver imaginable, to gain a controlling interest in her patents. He was, in many ways, her greatest adversary. Professor Ivanov, Steiner said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble with a faint German accent. A pleasure. Your work on quantum gravity is foundational. Mr. Steiner, her father replied, his voice filled with a respect that bordered on reverence. This was the pinnacle of the scientific world, where pure research met immense commercial power. The honor is all mine. Your company's commitment to advancing medical science is an inspiration to us all. Steiner gave a thin, dismissive smile. We do what we can, but we are merely developers. The true geniuses are the ones in the labs, the unknown soldiers. Speaking of which, he leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. Your institute is the talk of the town. This project, Genesis, it is the most significant development I have seen in my 40-year career. The mind behind it is a ghost, a phantom. We have tried to open a direct line of communication, but we are met with a wall of lawyers. You are a senior fellow, a man of influence. Surely you must have some idea who this person is. Anna held her breath. Her father was being presented with the ultimate test. Viktor Ivanov drew himself up, a look of thoughtful authority on his face. He stroked his chin, a gesture he always used when formulating a particularly impressive-sounding opinion. It is a closely guarded secret, of course, he said, his tone suggesting he was privy to information far beyond that of a common mortal. The Institute believes in protecting its assets, but the scuttlebutt in the senior commons is that it is likely a team, probably led by someone from outside our circles. Perhaps a defector from a rival program at Caltech, or even someone brought over from the Max Planck Institute. Someone with a proven track to record, a seasoned veteran. He paused, a self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. One thing is certain, however, he declared with absolute conviction. Whoever they are undoubtedly a man of singular, uncompromising vision. This is not the work of a committee. It is the work of a titan. A man. The word was a final, casual erasure. In her father's mind, a titan of science, a ghost of unimaginable genius, could only be a man. The possibility that this singular, visionary mind could belong to his own daughter was not just unlikely. It was, in the fundamental physics of his worldview, impossible. The pain of it was sharp and clean, like a paper cut. It was not a gaping wound, but a small, stinging reminder of a lifetime of being underestimated, of being so fundamentally misread. She pushed herself away from the pillar, the need for air suddenly overwhelming. She began to walk, moving along the periphery of the room, a ghost in her own right. She passed clusters of people, their conversations washing over her, a tide of ambition and ego. The grant proposal was rejected. They said our methodology was unsound. He stole my research, published it under his own name. I'm taking him to court. If we can just get through the phase 2 trials, the IPO will make us all wealthy beyond our wildest dreams. It was a world of sharp elbows and fragile egos, a world she had deliberately cordoned herself off from. Her lab was a sanctuary not just from her family, but from this, the relentless, grinding politics of professional science. She found herself near the grand, sweeping staircase that led to the mezzanine level. And there, standing at its base, was Dmitri. He was no longer with his medical colleagues. He was talking to a young, beautiful woman in a shimmering gold dress. It was Dr. Eris Thorne, a brilliant neuroscientist who had recently joined the Institute. Anna knew her work. It was elegant and insightful. She also knew that Dmitri had been pursuing her, unsuccessfully, for months. He was laying on the charm, his smile dazzling, his posture relaxed and confident. But Dr. Thorne looked distracted, her eyes scanning the crowd over Dimitri's shoulder. And so I told the chief of staff, if you want the best, you have to be willing to pay for the best equipment, Dimitri was saying, recounting some tale of hospital politics. That's fascinating, Dimitri, Dr. Thorne said, her smile polite but strained. Excuse me for a moment. I thought I saw someone. Her eyes swept the room, and, for a heart-stopping second, they locked with Anna's. A look of pure, unadulterated shock crossed Dr. Thorne's face, followed by something that looked like awe. She immediately excused herself from a perplexed Dimitri and began to move toward Anna with a sense of urgent purpose. Anna's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't know Dr. Thorne personally, but Dr. Thorne clearly knew who she was. The carefully constructed wall of her anonymity was about to be breached, not by her family, but by a professional peer. Before Dr. Thorne could reach her, however, Dimitri intercepted her. He had seen the direction of her gaze, and, putting two and two together and arriving at a spectacularly wrong answer, he moved to block her path to Anna. Eris, wait, he said, his voice laced with a pained, brotherly protectiveness. I should probably explain about my sister. He led the confused neuroscientist a few feet away, his back to Anna, but his voice carried clearly in the cavernous space. She's a bit overwhelmed, Dimitri explained in a low, confidential tone. She's not used to this sort of thing. She's very bright, of course, but not very practical. She works in one of the Institute's support labs. A bit of a recluse. To be honest, I'm not sure why she even came tonight. I think she might be having some sort of episode. I'm terribly sorry if she was staring or made you uncomfortable. He was creating a narrative, a plausible explanation for her presence, one that painted him as the concerned, responsible brother and her as the fragile, unstable sister who needed to be managed. He was building a wall of contempt and pity around her, brick by well-intentioned, devastating brick. And Dr. Eris Thorne, a woman whose entire career was based on her ability to analyze complex neural networks, simply stared at him, her mouth slightly agape, as if he had started speaking in tongues. The disconnect between the man she was hearing and the legendary scientist she had been trying to meet for months was so vast, so complete, that her brilliant mind was momentarily paralyzed by the sheer, baffling absurdity of it all. Anna watched the scene unfold, a silent, invisible ghost observing a play written about her, in which she had been cast as a madwoman in the attic. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the quiet life she had so carefully constructed was about to end. The whispers were about to become a roar. As Dimitri spun his protective, pitying narrative to a dumbfounded Dr. Thorne, Anna felt a strange and profound shift within herself. The initial sting of humiliation, the familiar ache of being misunderstood, began to recede. It was replaced by something else, something colder and clearer. It was the dispassionate focus of a scientist observing a system on the verge of collapse. She was no longer just a character in this family drama. She was becoming its primary chronicler, its historian. She slipped away from the scene near the staircase, melting back into the shadows along the ballroom's perimeter. She needed distance, not to hide, but to see the whole board. From the relative anonymity of the room's edge, she could observe her family as they moved through this ecosystem of power, their words and actions creating invisible threads that connected them, unknowingly, to the very center of the web she had spun. Her father was now the center of a new, even more prestigious constellation. He was standing with Carl Steiner of FarmCorp, Dean Holloway from the university, and a powerfully built man with a shock of white hair whom Anna recognized as Senator Davenport, the influential head of the Congressional Subcommittee on Science and Technology Funding. This was the apex predator's corner of the jungle. The real challenge, Senator, Victor was saying, his voice resonating with the conviction of a man who believes his own pronouncements, is not a lack of talent, but a lack of bold, visionary leadership. We have become too cautious, too incremental in our thinking. I couldn't agree more, Victor, Senator Davenport boomed, his voice a politician's well-honed instrument. That's why this geneticist project is such a breath of fresh air. It's a moonshot, the kind of big, bold thinking that made this country great. My office has been trying for weeks to arrange a briefing with the principal investigator. We're prepared to offer significant federal support to cut through the red tape. But the Institute is keeping this person under lock and key. It's frustrating. Carl Steiner, who had been listening with a predatory stillness, finally spoke. Perhaps it is for the best, Senator. A mind capable of such work should not be burdened with bureaucracy. It must be protected, cultivated. FarmCorp is prepared to build a state-of-the-art, fully autonomous research facility for this individual. A place where they can work, unburdened by financial concerns or administrative oversight, for the rest of their lives. We see it not as an acquisition, but as a patronage, a service to humanity. The offer was audacious, a corporate emperor offering to build a gilded cage for a genius he had never met. The potential profits for FarmCorp would be in the trillions. It was the most elegant, sophisticated form of intellectual piracy Anna had ever witnessed. Dean Holloway, a man whose primary skill was navigating the treacherous currents of university funding, saw his opening. An admirable sentiment, Carl. But let us not forget the role of the institution that nurtured this talent. The National Research Institute provided the environment, the resources. We believe the geneticist framework should remain within the academic sphere, where its benefits can be shared equitably, not monopolized by a single corporate entity. He said it with a noble air, but Anna knew the truth. The dean had seen the preliminary patent valuations. The licensing fees from Project Genesis would be enough to fund the entire university for the next 50 years, build a new medical school, and secure his legacy as the most successful dean in its history. They were vultures, all of them, circling, posturing, trying to claim a piece of a creation they could not comprehend, a creator they could not see. And her father stood among them, nodding sagely, offering his own uninformed theories, completely oblivious to the fact that the ghost they were all hunting was his own flesh and blood. Anna felt a phantom memory surface. It was from 3 months ago. She had been in her lab, wrestling with a particularly stubborn problem in the retroviral delivery vector. The math wasn't working, the simulations kept failing, and she had hit a wall. In a moment of sheer frustration, she had done something she hadn't done in years. She had called her father. "Dad," she had said. When he finally answered, his voice distracted. "Anya, is everything all right? I'm in the middle of a faculty dinner." "I know, sorry to bother you. I just had a quick theoretical question. It's a complex fluid dynamics problem relating to cellular membrane permeability. I thought, with your physics background." There had been a pause. She could hear the clinking of glasses and laughter in the background. "Anna, really," he had said, his voice laced with weary impatience. "I'm not a biologist. And I'm rather busy. Why don't you ask one of your supervisors at the lab tomorrow? That's what they're there for." "I have to go." He had hung up. She had stared at the phone for a full minute, the silence of her lab suddenly feeling vast and empty. That night, alone, she had worked through the problem. She had abandoned the fluid dynamics approach and recontextualized it as a problem of quantum tunneling, applying a niche principle from one of her father's own early papers, a paper she had read and understood, though he had never once asked her about her own reading. By dawn, she had solved it. The breakthrough had been the final key that unlocked the entire project. He had held the answer she needed, but had been unwilling to give it. And she, in turn, had taken his knowledge, a piece of his own intellectual legacy, and used it to build a world he couldn't even imagine. The thread was there, unseen by him, but shining and clear to her. Her gaze shifted across the room to her brother. The encounter with Dr. Thorne had clearly unsettled him. His usual, easy confidence was gone, replaced by a tense, watchful energy. He was standing with a group of his surgical residents, young, eager doctors who looked at him with a hero worship that mirrored the way he had always looked at their father. "The key is confidence," Dmitri was telling them, his voice a bit louder than necessary. "In the or, hesitation is death. You have to trust your training, your hands, your gut. You have to project an aura of absolute control, for the good of the patient and for the good of your team." A young resident, a woman with tired eyes, asked, "But what about when you don't know, Dr. Ivanov? When you face a complication you've never seen before?" Dmitri clapped him on the shoulder. "You never let them see you sweat. You rely on the fundamentals. And you never, ever admit uncertainty. The captain of the ship does not ask the passengers for directions." It was the gospel according to Viktor Ivanov, passed down from father to son. The illusion of omniscience was paramount. It was a philosophy so antithetical to Anna's own, where uncertainty was the starting point of all discovery, where the admission of ignorance was the first step toward true knowledge. Another thread shimmered into existence in her mind. A year ago, Dmitri had called her in a panic. An old, wealthy patient of his, a major benefactor of the hospital, had a daughter suffering from a rare, aggressive form of muscular dystrophy, a genetic disorder that was considered a death sentence. "Anya, you work in genetics, right?" he had asked, his usual swagger gone, replaced by a raw desperation. "This isn't my field. I've read all the literature, but it's hopeless. The family is asking me if there are any experimental treatments, anything at all. They're looking to me for a miracle, and I have nothing." For the first time, he had not been the confident surgeon, but a scared man facing the limits of his own power. Pity had moved her. She had spent the next 48 hours compiling her own research, including some of her preliminary, unpublished data from Genesis. She had sanitized it, removing anything that could identify her or the project, and sent him a detailed report outlining a potential therapeutic pathway that, while still highly theoretical, offered a sliver of hope. "Tell them there is a research group on the West Coast working on a novel RNA therapy," she had told them. "It's in the very early stages, but it's the only real shot they have. Here's the data. You can present it to them." Dmitri had been effusively grateful. He had taken her anonymous research and presented it to the family as his own discovery, a result of his tireless, brilliant networking. He had become their hero, the doctor who had gone above and beyond, who had found a miracle where others had found only despair. The family had been so impressed that they had endowed a new surgical wing at the hospital, to be named the Dr. Dmitry Ivanov Pavilion for Innovative Medicine. He had accepted the honor without ever mentioning her. He had taken her silent, invisible work and used it to build a monument to his own name. He stood there now, lecturing on the importance of projecting control, having built his latest success on a foundation of her quiet, unacknowledged labor. Anna felt a chill trace its way down her spine. The room was no longer just a collection of strangers. It was a tapestry, and she was the weaver. Every major player in this room, the very people her father and brother were so desperate to impress, were connected to her in ways they could not fathom. Steiner wanted to own her mind. The senator wanted to leverage her work for political gain. The dean wanted to use her patents to build his empire. Dr. Thorne revered her. Dmitri had built his reputation on a fragment of her research. And her father had unknowingly championed her genius while simultaneously mourning his daughter's failure. They were all puppets in a play she had written, and none of them could see the strings. This realization was not empowering. It was profoundly, terrifyingly lonely. She had built a world so secret, so powerful, that she had effectively erased herself from it. She had become the ghost everyone was talking about, and she was beginning to understand that ghosts, by their very nature, can only watch. They cannot participate. They cannot connect. They cannot be known. She felt a sudden, desperate need to break the spell, to tear down the wall of anonymity and step into the light, not for their approval, but for her own sanity. To prove to herself that she was more than just a disembodied intellect, more than the sum of her patents and discoveries. She looked across the room and saw her father, laughing at a joke the senator had made. She saw Dmitri accepting the adulation of his residents. They were so confident, so secure in their world, in their understanding of the universe. And that understanding was about to be shattered. She knew what was coming. In about 30 minutes, the evening's main event would begin. The president of the foundation would take the stage to announce the winner of the International Science Prize, the most prestigious award of the night, an honor sometimes referred to as the American Nobel. Dr. Levin had informed her, in a hushed and urgent phone call that morning, that the committee's decision had been unanimous. The prize was being awarded not to a person, but to a project, Genesis. And as the project's sole, principal investigator, she was expected to accept it. She had initially refused. But Levin had been insistent, his voice carrying the weight of the entire institute's board. "Anna, the time for anonymity is over. This is bigger than you. It's bigger than the institute. This is a moment for the world. You have to take your place." Now, standing in the ballroom, watching the unseen threads of her life connecting everyone around her, she finally understood what he meant. This wasn't about claiming credit. It was about collapsing the parallel universes she had been living in. It was about integrating the ghost in the machine with the woman of flesh and blood. A waiter walked past with a tray of champagne. On impulse, Anna took a glass. The crystal was cool against her fingers, the bubbles a quiet, fizzing energy. She took a sip. The taste was crisp and cold and sharp. It tasted like the future. She found a quiet corner with a clear view of the main stage, and she settled in to watch the final act. The play was almost over, and the ghost was about to take a bow. The polite, structured chaos of the cocktail hour was beginning to wind down. A soft, three-tone chime echoed through the ballroom, a gentle but insistent signal for the guests to begin moving toward their designated tables for dinner. The ambient roar of conversation subsided into a more directed murmur as the herd began to migrate. It was during this transitional moment, this brief lull in the social currents, that Dmitri saw his chance. He had been watching his sister. After his preemptive explanation to Dr. Thorne, an exchange that had left the brilliant neuroscientist looking at him with an expression of profound, clinical bewilderment before she simply turned and walked away, Dmitri had felt a growing sense of unease. Anna hadn't done what he expected. She hadn't hovered awkwardly in a corner or made a clumsy attempt to socialize. Instead, she had moved with a strange, quiet purpose along the room's periphery, a silent observer whose very stillness was unnerving. She wasn't acting like a lost lamb. She was acting like a predator casing the terrain. It didn't fit the narrative he had constructed for her, and the discrepancy was setting his teeth on edge. He saw her now, standing near the grand staircase, a half-empty glass of champagne in her hand, her gaze fixed on the main stage. Her composure was absolute. It was the composure of someone waiting for a performance to begin, a performance in which she was not a reluctant audience member, but the main event. This was wrong. This was dangerous. He felt a primal, brotherly urge to take control, to impose order on a situation that was spiraling beyond his comprehension. He strode toward her, his movements decisive. His father, currently deep in what appeared to be a fawning conversation with Senator Davenport, would not be able to intervene. This was up to him. He would handle his sister. He would be firm, but kind. He would escort her out of the hotel himself if he had to, before she could commit some unforgivable social faux pas, or, worse, have a complete public breakdown. "Anya," he said, his voice low and firm as he reached her side. He deliberately placed himself between her and the rest of the room, creating a small, private space for what he intended to be a final, non-negotiable confrontation. "This has gone on long enough. You've made your point, whatever it was. Now it's time to go." Anna turned her head to look at him. Her expression was unreadable. There was no fear, no anger, not even the hurt he had expected to see. There was only a calm, unnerving clarity in her gray eyes. It was like looking into deep, still water. "I'm not going anywhere, Dima," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "Don't be ridiculous," he hissed, his frustration mounting. "You can't stay for the dinner. The seating charts are arranged with excruciating care. You don't have a seat. Where are you going to sit? Are you going to pull up a chair at someone else's table? Do you have any idea how mortifying that would be?" "I'm sure something will be arranged," she replied, a faint, cryptic smile touching her lips. The smile was the final straw. It was the calm, infuriating smile of someone who held a winning hand but refused to show their cards. It broke through Dmitri's carefully maintained composure. All his life, he had been the one in control, the one who understood the rules, the one who succeeded. His sister was the one who needed his help, his guidance, his protection. Her current behavior was a violation of the fundamental laws of their relationship. He reached out and took her by the arm, his grip firm. "That's it. We're leaving. Now. I'm not going to stand here and watch you humiliate yourself and our family." His voice was a low, angry growl. He began to pull her toward a side exit, away from the main flow of guests. Anna did not resist. She did not struggle. She simply allowed the momentum to carry her, her body pliant but her gaze still fixed on some point over his shoulder. And then, just as he was maneuvering her toward the exit, a new voice cut through the air, sharp and authoritative. "Dr. Ivanov, I would advise you to release your hand from that woman's arm." Immediately, Dmitri froze. The voice was unmistakable. It was the voice of command, the voice of ultimate authority within the institute. He turned slowly, his hand still gripping Anna's arm. Dr. Anatoly Levin, the director of the National Research Institute, stood 3 feet away. His usually genial, slightly rumpled appearance was gone. His face was set in lines of cold, hard fury. His eyes, behind his spectacles, were like chips of ice. He was not looking at Dmitri as a colleague's son, or as a respected surgeon. He was looking at him as if he were a piece of filth he had just found on the sole of his shoe. Beside Dr. Levin stood 2 other men. One was the head of Institute Security, a large, imposing man in a dark suit whose presence was a clear and present threat. The other was a man Dmitri recognized with a jolt of shock, Professor Mikhail Orlov, her mentor. He was older and more frail than Dmitri remembered, leaning heavily on a cane, but his eyes, fixed on Dmitri's hand on Anna's arm, burned with a fierce, protective fire. "Director Levin," Dmitri stammered, his hand falling away from Anna's arm as if it had been burned. My sister was feeling unwell. I was just escorting her outside for some fresh air. The lie was clumsy, pathetic, and he knew it sounded so. Dr. Levin ignored him completely. His furious gaze softened as it fell upon Anna. He stepped forward, his entire demeanor changing from one of rage to one of profound respect and concern. "Dr. Ivanova," he said, his voice now filled with a warmth that was almost paternal. "My sincerest apologies. I was delayed with the senator. I should have been here for you. Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" Anna simply shook her head, her gaze shifting to Professor Orloff. A genuine, radiant smile finally broke through her calm facade. "Misha," she breathed, using the affectionate diminutive she hadn't used since she was a student. "Anyusha," the old man rasped, his voice thick with emotion. He took a shaky step forward and reached out, not to her arm, but to her hand, holding it gently in his own trembling one. "I knew you would come. I told them all you would come. You look well, my child. You look strong." The scene was utterly baffling. Dmitri stared, his mind reeling. Director Levin, one of the most powerful men in their field, was speaking to his sister with a deference he usually reserved for Nobel laureates and major donors. And Professor Orloff, a living legend, was looking at her with an expression of fierce, unadulterated pride. The cognitive dissonance was so overwhelming that Dmitri felt a wave of dizziness. By now, the tableau had begun to attract attention. The flow of guests to the tables faltered as people turned to stare. They saw the director of the NRI, its most revered emeritus professor, and its head of security, all gathered around a mysterious, unknown woman in a simple blue dress, who was being confronted by the son of the famous Viktor Ivanov. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. It was at that moment that Viktor Ivanov, having finally extricated himself from the politicians, noticed the commotion. He saw his son, his daughter, and the director of the institute in a tense standoff. A look of pure horror crossed his face. His daughter, his unpredictable, embarrassing daughter, was now creating a public scene with the most powerful man at the institute. This was a catastrophe beyond his wildest imaginings. He strode over, his face a mask of controlled fury, ready to apologize, to smooth things over, to drag his entire family out of the hotel if necessary. "Anatoly," he boomed, trying to project an air of collegial bonhomie that felt painfully false. "I apologize for whatever misunderstanding has occurred here. My daughter, she can be a bit overwhelmed by crowds. My son was simply trying to assist her." Dr. Levin slowly turned his head to face Victor. The look in his eyes was one of pure, undiluted contempt. "Victor," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "your son was physically manhandling one of this institute's, and indeed, one of the world's, most valuable scientific assets. Your assistance is not required. In fact, I would strongly suggest you and your son step aside." Victor stared, speechless. Valuable scientific asset? He looked at Anna, at her plain face and simple dress, and the words made no sense. It was like calling a sparrow an eagle. "I think," Dr. Levin continued, his voice rising just enough to be heard by the curious onlookers who were now shamelessly listening, "that there has been a profound misunderstanding here tonight. A misunderstanding that I feel compelled to correct." He turned to fully face the crowd, his bearing that of a man about to make a historic announcement. He placed a protective hand on Anna's shoulder. "Many of you," he began, his voice ringing with authority, "have spent this evening speculating about the identity of the mind behind Project Genesis. You have spoken of a ghost, a phantom, an eccentric recluse. You have theorized about his origins, his motivations, his name." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. He looked at Victor, then at Dmitri, a strange, grim smile on his face. "You have, almost universally, gotten it wrong, particularly on the matter of pronouns." He turned his gaze back to the crowd, his expression one of immense pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues," he declared, his voice resonating through the now silent ballroom. "It is my profound honor to end the speculation. The ghost is not a ghost. The Titan is not a man. The architect of the future, the founder and sole principal investigator of Project Genesis, is standing right here." He tightened his hand on Anna's shoulder. "Allow me to introduce you to my colleague, my friend, and my hero, Dr. Anna Viktorovna Ivanova." The name dropped into the silence like a stone into a perfectly still pond. The ripples of shock spread outwards, a wave of collective, gasping disbelief. Carl Steiner's jaw literally dropped. Senator Davenport's eyes widened in stunned comprehension. Dean Holloway looked as if he had been struck by lightning. And then there was her family. Dmitri staggered back a step, his face a bloodless mask of horror. His mind frantically replayed the last hour, his condescension, his pity, his dismissive words, his physical aggression. He had not been trying to save his sister from embarrassment. He had been assaulting the most important scientist of the 21st century. Viktor Ivanov stood frozen, a statue of crumbling pride. The world tilted on its axis. Every condescending word, every dismissive gesture, every proud pronouncement about his son's real science while his daughter played with her hobbies, all of it came rushing back to him in a tidal wave of shame. The anonymous genius he had praised, the titan whose work he had championed, the mind he had revered from afar, was the daughter he had pitted. The failure he had hidden was, in fact, the greatest success the Ivanov name had ever or would ever produce. He looked at Anna. She was not looking at him. She was looking at Professor Orlov, who was beaming, tears streaming freely down his wrinkled cheeks. And in her eyes, Victor saw not triumph, but a vast, oceanic sadness. It was the sadness of a child who had finally come home, only to find the house empty. The silence was finally broken by a single, sharp sound. From the back of the room, someone began to clap. It was Dr. Eris Thorne. The sound was picked up by another, then a dozen more. Within seconds, the entire ballroom, filled with the brightest and most powerful minds in the world, erupted in a thunderous, rolling ovation. They were not applauding a name. They were applauding the ghost who had just stepped out of the machine, a titan who had just been revealed, a woman who was about to change their world. And she stood there, quiet and still, in her simple blue dress, the calm eye in the center of her own hurricane. The applause was a physical force, a wall of sound that seemed to press in on Anna from all sides. It was a roar of acclaim, of shock, of dawning, world-altering comprehension. For a lifetime, she had worked in the profound silence of her lab, her only audience the quiet hum of her machines. Now, the roar of the world was deafening, and she felt herself swaying, unmoored in the sudden, violent storm of her own revelation. A hand, firm and steady, gripped her elbow. It was not her brother's aggressive grasp, but Dr. Levin's grounding, supportive touch. "Steady, doctor," he murmured, his voice a low anchor in the hurricane of noise. "Breathe. You've earned this." She drew a shaky breath, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the electric charge of shattered preconceptions. She looked out at the sea of faces, and it was like looking at a time-lapse photograph of human emotion. She saw stunned disbelief morphing into grudging respect on the faces of the older, established academics. She saw pure, unadulterated awe in the eyes of the young graduate students. She saw the rapid, calculating glint of opportunity in the expressions of the corporate executives and venture capitalists, their minds already recalibrating, reevaluating, reassessing the value of the woman in the simple blue dress. Carl Steiner of FarmCorp was no longer smiling. His face was a mask of intense, predatory focus. He was not looking at a person. He was looking at a living, breathing paradigm shift, a multi-trillion-dollar asset that had just been given a name and a face. His earlier offer of patronage now seemed laughably naive. He would not be building a cage for a ghost. He would have to petition a queen for an audience. Senator Davenport, ever the politician, was already recovering. A broad, effusive smile spread across his face as he began to applaud with performative enthusiasm, as if he had been in on the secret all along. He was already composing the press release in his head, positioning himself as an early champion of this newfound national treasure. But Anna's gaze was not on them. It was drawn, as if by an irresistible, tragic magnetism, to the two men who stood frozen in the eye of her storm. Her father and her brother. They were statues in a tableau of ruin. Dmitri looked like a man who had just witnessed a car crash in slow motion, only to realize he was the one behind the wheel. His face was a canvas of pale, sickly green. His confident, athletic posture had collapsed, leaving him looking stooped and hollowed out. He stared at his own hands as if they were alien things, the hands that had presumed to manhandle a mind that could reshape the human genome. The shame radiating from him was so potent it was almost visible, a shimmering heat haze of self-loathing. He had spent his life basking in the sun of his father's approval and his own achievements, and in a single, cataclysmic moment, he had been plunged into an eclipse of his own making, utterly overshadowed by the sister he had so casually despised. If Dmitri's reaction was one of personal, social horror, her father's was something deeper, something existential. Viktor Ivanov was a man whose entire identity was built on the bedrock of his intellect, his understanding of the world, his place within the grand hierarchy of knowledge. And that bedrock had just been pulverized into dust. He was not looking at Anna. He couldn't. His gaze was fixed on some distant, middle point in space, his eyes wide with a look of such profound, abject bewilderment that Anna felt a pang of something akin to pity. He was a great physicist who had just discovered that the fundamental laws of his own universe were a lie. The daughter he had classified as a minor celestial body, a faint, inconsequential moon, had just been revealed as the sun around which his entire world, and the world of everyone in this room, had been secretly orbiting. His mind, a powerful engine of logic, was frantically trying to reconcile two irreconcilable data sets: Anna, my disappointing, unambitious daughter, and Dr. Ivanova, the anonymous genius, the titan of science. The system was crashing. The man he was, the identity he had so carefully constructed over 70 years, was being overwritten by a new, terrible reality. He was not the great Dr. Ivanov. He was merely the father of the real Dr. Ivanov. He was a footnote in her story. The applause finally began to die down, not because the sentiment had waned, but because the president of the foundation, a distinguished, white-haired man named Dr. Alistair Finch, the very same surgeon Dmitri had been trying so hard to impress earlier, had taken the stage and was holding up his hands for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Finch said, his voice imbued with a new sense of gravity and occasion, "I believe we can all agree that this evening has taken a remarkable turn. In light of this, we will be slightly altering our program." He smiled, a genuine, warm smile directed at Anna. "It seems our keynote speaker has just been revealed to us." A fresh wave of murmurs and whispers swept through the room. "But first," Dr. Finch continued, "we have the final and most prestigious award of the evening to present. The International Science Prize for Innovation. As you know, the prize is awarded to an individual or team whose work represents a fundamental breakthrough, a discovery with the potential to significantly alter the course of human progress." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room before landing, once again, on Anna. This year, for the first time in the Foundation's history, the selection committee's decision was not just unanimous, it was instantaneous. There was only one possible choice. The prize is being awarded not for a single discovery, but for a whole new continent of scientific possibility. It is awarded to Project Genesis. He picked up the award from the lectern. It was a heavy, abstract sculpture of interlocking gold and crystal, beautiful and complex. As the founder and principal investigator of this revolutionary project, Dr. Finch declared, his voice ringing with emotion, "It is my distinct honor to ask Dr. Anna Ivanova to come forward and accept this prize on behalf of the future she is giving to all of us." The applause that erupted this time was even more thunderous, a sustained, rolling roar of pure acclamation. It was no longer just for the shock of the revelation, it was for the work itself. Professor Orloff squeezed her hand. "Go, my child," he whispered, his voice thick with tears. "Go and take what you have earned." Dr. Levin gave her a gentle push forward. "Your stage, doctor." Walking toward that stage was the longest journey of Anna's life. Each step felt disconnected from the last. The rich, patterned carpet seemed to stretch out before her into an infinite plain. She was intensely aware of the hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, a weight of expectation that was almost physical. She passed tables of people she had only ever read about in journals, scientific luminaries who now looked at her with undisguised reverence. As she passed her family's designated table, a prime spot near the front, now conspicuously empty save for a few untouched water glasses, she could feel her father's and brother's gazes on her back. They were still frozen near the entrance, unable to move, unable to retreat, trapped in the spotlight of her ascendancy. She reached the small set of stairs leading to the stage. Dr. Finch came forward and offered her his hand, helping her up the final step. The gesture was one of pure, old-fashioned chivalry, a recognition not just of her genius, but of her grace under what he must have known was immense personal pressure. She stood before the lectern, the bright stage lights warm on her face. The roar of the crowd slowly subsided into an expectant, breathless silence. She looked out at the assembly. It was a sea of power, intellect, and wealth, and they were all waiting for her to speak. She had prepared nothing. Her attendance tonight had been an act of personal defiance, not a planned public debut. The words that were expected of her, words of gratitude, of humility, of scientific vision, felt foreign and inadequate. She looked down at the award Dr. Finch had placed in her hands. It was heavy, heavier than she expected. The cool, smooth surfaces of the crystal and gold felt real, tangible. It was a physical object representing a decade of silent, solitary work. It was the endpoint of a journey no one else had witnessed. And when she finally looked up and spoke, The words that came out were not the ones anyone expected. They were simple, honest, and devastatingly personal. "Thank you," she began, her voice quiet but carried by the microphone to every corner of the vast room. "Thank you, Dr. Finch and the committee." She paused, her gaze sweeping past the front rows, past the powerful men and women, until it found the two figures still standing like ghosts at the edge of the room. "There is a story," she said, her voice gaining a strange, narrative calm that scientists like to tell themselves. "It's a story about pure, dispassionate logic, about the relentless pursuit of truth, unburdened by emotion or personal history. It's a noble story, and, for the most part, it's a fiction." A ripple of intrigue murmuring went through the audience. This was not the standard acceptance speech. "Science is not born in a vacuum," she continued, her eyes still locked on her father and brother. "It is born of curiosity, yes, but it is also born of defiance. It is born of loneliness. It is born of a desperate need to create a world that makes sense when the one you inhabit does not. It is born of the desire to build something so true, so real, so undeniable, that it can withstand the corrosive acid of doubt." She saw her father flinch. The word doubt hung in the air between them, a shared and terrible knowledge. Project Genesis did not begin with a grant proposal or a research plan. It began in a small room, late at night, with a young girl who was told that her questions were too big, her ambitions too unrealistic. It was nurtured not in a state-of-the-art facility, but in the quiet, stubborn refusal to accept the limitations that others had placed upon her. She shifted her gaze to her brother, who looked as if he was about to be physically sick. It was fueled by every casual dismissal, by every condescending pat on the head, by every well-intentioned piece of advice to be more practical. Every time I was told I didn't belong in a room like this, it added another line of code. Every time my work was called a hobby, it funded another experiment. You see, the greatest breakthroughs sometimes require the most powerful fuel. And sometimes, the most powerful fuel is pain. The silence in the room was now absolute. It was no longer just expectant. It was heavy with the raw, uncomfortable weight of a deeply personal confession being made public. This was not a speech about science. It was a vivisection of a family. "So, yes, I am grateful for this award," she said, looking back down at the golden object in her hands. "But my real reward was not this. It was the work itself. It was the silence. It was the freedom. It was the creation of a sanctuary of logic and reason, a place where the only judgment that mattered was whether or not the data was sound. A place where I was not a daughter or a sister, but simply a mind at work." She took a deep breath, the final, difficult words forming on her lips. "I am told that this work will change the world, and I hope it does, but it has already changed mine. It taught me that you do not need anyone else's permission to be brilliant. You do not need their validation to be worthy. And you do not need their applause to know that you have one." She placed the award carefully on the lectern. "Thank you," she said again, a simple, final punctuation mark. And with that, before the stunned audience could even begin to process what had happened, before they could begin their applause, she turned and walked off the stage, leaving a silence more profound and more thunderous than any ovation could ever be. She had not come to accept their prize. She had come to give them her truth. The silence Anna left behind on the stage was a living entity. It was a dense, heavy blanket woven from shock, awe, and the profound discomfort of bearing witness to something so nakedly, brutally honest. Her speech had not been a performance, it had been a reckoning. She had taken the glittering, self-congratulatory artifice of the gala and sliced it open, exposing the raw, beating heart of her own history. As she descended the stage steps, her legs feeling strangely disconnected from her body, the silence was finally broken. It wasn't with applause. It was with a single, collective exhalation, as if the entire room had been holding its breath and had only just remembered how to breathe. Then, the murmuring began again, but it was different now. It was no longer the light, social chatter of before. It was a low, stunned, and intensely focused hum. They were not just talking about a scientific breakthrough anymore. They were talking about the woman who had just laid her soul bare. She did not return to the small table where Dr. Levin and Professor Orloff were sitting. She could not face their kind, proud faces just yet. She needed to keep moving, to walk through the wreckage she had created. She skirted the edge of the ballroom, her path taking her past the very people who had, just an hour ago, been the titans of her world. Now, they seemed diminished, their power and influence rendered small by the sheer, elemental force of her truth. Carl Steiner, the CEO of FarmCorp, intercepted her near the grand floral arrangement. His cold, reptilian eyes were now alight with a new kind of fire. It was not just the calculating gaze of a businessman. It was the intense, almost fanatical look of a true believer who has just found a new god. Dr. Ivanova, he said, his voice a low, urgent rumble. He had abandoned all pretense of corporate diplomacy. What you have done, what you have said, it is magnificent. A mind like yours, it must not be shackled. My offer of a private facility was insulting in its modesty. Forgive me. I see now. You do not need a facility. You need a kingdom. And FarmCorp is prepared to build it for you. Name your terms. Any terms. We will found an entire division, the Ivanova Institute for Genetic Engineering. You will have a limitless budget, complete autonomy, a staff of hundreds, all dedicated to serving your vision. We will not be patrons. We will be your acolytes. His offer was staggering, a blank check to create her own scientific empire. A year ago, a month ago, even this morning, such an offer would have been the culmination of a life's dream. But now, after the raw catharsis of her speech, it felt like just another cage, albeit a much larger and more luxurious one. Thank you, Mr. Steiner, she said, her voice even and calm. But my work has always thrived on limitations. It forces creativity. She sidestepped him, leaving the billionaire CEO staring after her, his face a mask of frustrated desire. He was a man who believed everything had a price, and he had just encountered something priceless. Next came Senator Davenport, his politician smile firmly in place, his eyes gleaming with strategic zeal. He caught her by the arm, his grip firm but friendly. Doctor, that was one of the most powerful speeches I have ever heard, he boomed, his voice projecting for the benefit of anyone nearby. A truly American story of grit and genius. I want you to know that my office is at your disposal. We need voices like yours in Washington. We need to cut through the bureaucratic nonsense and get real visionaries the resources they need. I'm putting together a new Presidential Science Advisory Committee. I want you to chair it. To chair a presidential committee, to shape national science policy, to have the ear of the most powerful people on the planet. It was an offer of immense influence. But Anna saw the threads. She saw how her story would be used, spun into a political narrative, how her work would become a tool for partisan agendas. I appreciate the offer, Senator, she said, gently extracting her arm from his grasp. But I believe my work is best done in the lab, not in a committee room. She moved on, a ghost gliding through her own coronation ball. Every person she passed now saw her, truly saw her. Their eyes followed her with a mixture of awe, reverence, and a little bit of fear. She had become something more than a scientist. She had become a symbol, a legend in her own time, and it was the loneliest feeling in the world. Her journey through the hall was a walk through the landscape of her own past, a confrontation with all the ghosts she had outrun. She saw a professor who had once given her a C on a paper, telling her her ideas were unfounded speculation. He now looked at her as if she were a deity, his face flushed with a mixture of pride that he had once taught her and shame that he had so utterly failed to recognize her. She saw a former colleague who had once mocked her for her obsessive work habits. He now raised his glass to her in a silent toast of abject apology. The entire social fabric of her professional world had been rewoven around her in the space of an hour. And yet, the only people she truly wanted to see, the only opinions that still held a strange, vestigial power over her, were those of the two men still frozen by the entrance. Her path, as if guided by some unseen force, finally led her to them. They had not moved. They were standing in the exact same spot, isolated by a wide, invisible circle of discomfort. No one dared approach them. They were the disgraced royal family at the crowning of a usurper queen. They were relics of a fallen regime. Dmitri was the first to see her approach. He flinched, a full-body recoil, as if her very presence was a source of physical pain. He could not meet her eyes. He stared at the floor, his handsome face pale and drawn, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The confident, charismatic surgeon was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell of a man. All the easy charm, all the casual superiority had been stripped away, leaving only the raw, exposed nerve of his own inadequacy. Her father, however, did look at her. And the look in his eyes was the most complex and painful thing Anna had ever seen. The shock and bewilderment were still there, but they were now mixed with a dawning, agonizing comprehension. He was finally seeing her. Not the idea of her, not the projection of his own disappointments, but the real, living, breathing woman who stood before him. He was seeing the years of quiet work, the solitary struggle, the towering intellect he had dismissed as a hobby. He was seeing the daughter he had failed. Anna, he whispered, his voice a dry, cracked rasp. It was the first time he had spoken since the revelation. The name was not a statement, not a question. It was a surrender. Father, she replied, her own voice quiet. There was no anger left in her. The fires of her speech had burned all of that away, leaving only a vast, empty landscape of sorrow. For a long moment, they just stood there, a family separated by an unbridgeable chasm of their own making. The noise of the gala, the whispers, and the clinking glasses all faded into a distant, irrelevant hum. There was only the charged silence between them. Victor began, then stopped. His formidable vocabulary, the arsenal of words that had served him his entire life, failed him. What could he say? I'm sorry. The words were a pitifully small vessel for the ocean of his regret. I didn't know? It was not an excuse. It was the indictment itself. It was Dmitri who finally spoke, his voice thick and choked, his eyes still fixed on the floor. The surgical pavilion, he muttered, the words almost inaudible. The one they named for me. The research you sent, that was you. That was Genesis. It was not a question. It was a confession. Yes, Anna said simply. Dmitri finally looked up, and his eyes were swimming with a shame so profound it was almost difficult to witness. I built my reputation on your miracle. I took your work, and I put my name on it. He let out a short, harsh sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. The captain of the ship. I was lecturing my residents on confidence, while the real architect of the victory was a woman I called unstable. He shook his head, a slow, continuous motion of disbelief at his own monumental blindness. I am so sorry, Anya. It's not enough. There are no words. There are no words for what I am. Anna looked at her brother, at the broken man who had replaced the arrogant peacock of an hour ago, and she felt a flicker of the old, familial bond, a muscle memory of affection. His apology was real. His shame was absolute. It was a start. But her father was a more complex equation. Why? Victor asked again, the same word he had used in the corridor, but this time it was freighted with a new, deeper meaning. It was not, why didn't you tell us? It was, why did I not see? I tried to tell you, Anna said, her voice gentle, but firm. Many times. You just weren't listening. She decided, in that moment, to give him one final, painful piece of the truth. The night I solved the delivery vector problem, the final piece of the puzzle. I called you. I was stuck. I asked for your help with a fluid dynamics problem. You told me you were busy at a faculty dinner and that I should ask my supervisor. You hung up on me. Victor's face went white. He remembered the call. Vaguely. A minor annoyance during an important dinner. A distraction. He had dismissed it without a second thought. That night, Anna continued, her voice relentless but not cruel, I solved it myself. I used the principles from your 1988 paper on quantum tunneling and semi-permeable membranes. The paper you once told me was the best work you'd ever done. The work you were proudest of. I used your best work to complete my own. The connection was always there. You just had to look. The final thread was laid bare. He had not just been blind to her. He had been blind to the echo of his own genius within her. He had held the key to her breakthrough, and he had refused her. And she had succeeded anyway, using a part of him that he himself had long forgotten. Viktor Ivanov, the great physicist, finally, completely, broke. His broad shoulders slumped. The formidable intellectual fortress he had built around himself his entire life crumbled into dust. He looked at his daughter, at this stranger who was a titan, at this genius who was his flesh and blood, and his eyes filled with the slow, hot tears of a man who has just understood the true, colossal scale of his own failure. It was not just a failure of perception. It was a failure of love. Can you ever forgive us? He whispered, the words a raw plea from the ruins of his pride. Anna looked at her father's tear-streaked face, at her brother's shattered form. Forgiveness. It was a simple word for a complex, messy thing. Could she forgive them? Perhaps. In time. But that wasn't the point. This was never about forgiveness, father, she said, and her voice was filled with a quiet, sad wisdom. It was about respect. You didn't respect my choices. You didn't respect my mind. You didn't respect me. You only respect success once it's been validated by the world, once it comes with a title and a prize. You respect this. She gestured vaguely at the glittering room, at the award on the stage, but you never respected the quiet, lonely, difficult work it took to get here. She let the words sink in, a final, painful lesson. I need some air, she said, her voice suddenly weary. The emotional toll of the evening had finally caught up with her. She turned and walked away from them, away from the wreckage of her family. She walked past the gawking onlookers, past the powerful men who wanted to own her, past the colleagues who now revered her. She walked through the grand lobby, her simple blue dress a stark contrast to the gilded opulence. The doorman, the same one who had let her in, now rushed to open the door for her, his expression one of almost religious awe. "Congratulations, doctor," he murmured. Anna stepped out into the cold, clear night. The city air was sharp and clean in her lungs. She looked up at the vast, starless sky, a black canvas of infinite possibility. The roar of the gala faded behind her, replaced by the distant, rhythmic pulse of the city. She was alone, but for the first time in her life, she was not lonely. She was free. The ghost had finally left the machine, and Anna Ivanova, the woman, was ready to begin. The quiet corridor that Anna had found earlier, her small pocket of silence, was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a makeshift receiving line, a pilgrimage site. As soon as she had walked away from the ruin of her family, she had been swept up in a current of well-wishes and opportunism. People she had never met before were now pressing business cards into her hand, their eyes shining with a fervent, almost desperate light. They wanted to collaborate, to invest, to simply be near the source of the new power that had just been unleashed in their world. It was suffocating. The air, once again, felt thick and hard to breathe, not with perfume, but with the cloying scent of expectation. She deflected their offers with a polite but firm, "My director handles all inquiries," a phrase that Dr. Levin had drilled into her, and managed to extricate herself, seeking refuge not outside, but in the one place she knew she would be truly alone. She found a heavy oak door marked private and slipped through it, finding herself in a narrow, dimly lit service hallway that smelled of dust and old wood. It was blessedly, profoundly silent. Leaning against the cool plaster wall, she closed her eyes, the chaotic mosaic of the last 2 hours replaying in her mind. The contempt, the revelation, the applause, the shame on her father's face. It was too much to process, a lifetime of emotional data compressed into a single, overwhelming event. A soft cough echoed from the end of the hallway. Anna's eyes snapped open. She was not alone. An old, familiar figure was sitting on a wooden stool tucked into an alcove, a figure she had been seeking all evening. "Misha," she breathed, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled her knees, washing over her. Professor Mikhail Orlov smiled, his wrinkled face a landscape of deep affection. "I thought you might seek quieter pastures, Anyusha," he rasped, his voice thin but clear. "The feeding frenzy out there is not for the faint of heart." She walked toward him, each step feeling lighter than the last. Here was her true north. Here was the one person whose opinion had always mattered, the one person who had never needed a public revelation to see her. "I didn't think you had come," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she sat on the floor opposite him, tucking her legs beneath her simple dress. The cold of the floorboards was a grounding sensation. "And missed the greatest I told you so moment in the history of modern science," he chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world. My doctors advised against it. They said the excitement might be too much for my heart. I told them that watching you take your rightful place would be the only thing that could make it beat stronger." His words were a balm on the raw, open wounds of the evening. She rested her head against the wall, looking at her old mentor, her anchor. "Was I too harsh, Misha?" she asked, the question a vulnerable whisper. "My speech, it wasn't what I planned. It just came out." Orlov looked at her, his gaze clear and penetrating. "Harsh. My child, truth is not a matter of harshness. It is a matter of necessity. You did not speak out of vengeance. You spoke out of a need to reclaim your own narrative. For 20 years, your family has been writing your story for you, casting you as a minor, tragic character. Tonight, you simply picked up the pen and wrote the correct ending. Or rather," he smiled again, "the correct beginning." He leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. "Do not for a moment feel guilt for their pain. Their pain is not your creation. It is the long overdue consequence of their own blindness. A man who stares at the sun and calls it a candle has no one to blame but himself when he is finally dazzled." "My father," Anna began, the word catching in her throat. "He looked so broken." "Victor is a brilliant man," Orlov said, his tone one of careful, academic assessment. "But his brilliance is narrow. He understands the universe, but he does not understand people. He, like many men of his generation, built his world on a foundation of clear, unshakable hierarchies. And you, my dear, you did not just disrupt his hierarchy. You took a sledgehammer to its very foundation. He is not just mourning his failure as a father. He is mourning the death of a world he understood. He will have to learn a new physics. It will be difficult for him. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the old professor and his brilliant protege, two minds that understood each other perfectly. I saw you talking to Steiner, Orloff said eventually, his eyes twinkling. I imagine he was offering you the keys to the kingdom. And a crown to go with it, Anna confirmed with a wry smile. Be wary of men who offer kingdoms, Anyusha, the old man cautioned. They always expect to be named prime minister. Your genius has flourished in the shadows, in the quiet places, free from the demands of commerce and politics. Do not let them build you a golden cage, no matter how comfortable. I have no intention of it, she assured him. The lab is my kingdom. It's the only one I need. Good, he nodded, satisfied. But your anonymity is gone forever. You are a public figure now. You will be a symbol, especially for the young women in science who have been told, as you were, that their dreams are too big. That will be a heavy burden to carry. I know, Anna said quietly. The weight of that new responsibility was already settling on her shoulders. But you will not carry it alone, Orloff said, his voice firm. He reached into the inner pocket of his old, tweed jacket and pulled out a worn, leather-bound notebook and a pen. Now, he said, his eyes gleaming with the old, familiar fire of intellectual curiosity that she had first seen in him all those years ago. The awards and the family drama are, I admit, moderately interesting. But what I really want to know is how you solve the tertiary protein folding issue. I have a theory involving stochastic resonance, but I suspect you found a more elegant solution. Walk me through the algorithm, my dear. Start from the beginning. And so, sitting on the floor of a dusty service corridor, while a world of wealth and power buzzed just beyond the door, Anna Ivanova finally got to have the conversation she had been waiting a lifetime for. She spoke not of her pain or her triumph, but of her work. She explained her theories, sketched equations on the back of her invitation card with Orloff's pen, her voice filled with a passion and clarity that had been absent in her public speech. She spoke of the beauty of the math, the sublime elegance of the code, the moment of pure, transcendent joy when the final simulation ran successfully. And Misha listened, his head cocked, interjecting with sharp, insightful questions, challenging her assumptions, pushing her to articulate her reasoning more clearly. He didn't see a titan or a ghost or a billionaire. He saw a scientist. And in that moment, Anna felt more whole, more truly herself, than she had at any other point in the chaotic evening. For an hour they talked, two minds dancing in the pure, abstract world of ideas. They were so engrossed that they didn't hear the oak door creak open. Viktor Ivanov stood in the doorway, a man adrift. He had been looking for Anna, perhaps to apologize again, perhaps to simply be in her presence, to try and understand the new reality. He had expected to find her being courted by Steiner or the senator. He did not expect to find her sitting on a dirty floor, her face animated with a brilliant, joyful light, deep in a technical discussion with her old mentor. He stood and listened, and the final, most painful piece of his education fell into place. He could not understand what they were talking about. He, Professor Viktor Ivanov, a man who prided himself on his vast intellect, could not follow the conversation. The concepts were too advanced, the terminology too specialized. They were speaking a language he did not know, discussing a world he could not enter. He could recognize the broad strokes, genetics, cellular biology, but the intricate, elegant details of his own daughter's life's work were utterly beyond his comprehension. He had not just underestimated her ambition. He had fundamentally failed to grasp the sheer scale of her intellect. She had not just surpassed him, she had lapped him. She was operating in a different intellectual dimension, and he saw the look on her face as she spoke to Orloff. It was a look of pure, unadulterated joy, of deep, mutual respect and understanding. It was a look he had never, not once, seen her direct at him. She was sharing her true self, her brilliant, beautiful mind, with another man. Because that man had created a space for it. He had nurtured it, challenged it, and celebrated it. He had been the father to her mind, while Victor had only been the father to her body. It was the most profound and painful exclusion he had ever experienced. He was on the outside looking in, a stranger to his own daughter's soul. He finally understood. His failure was not that he hadn't believed she could be successful. His failure was that he had never bothered to learn the language of her heart. Quietly, so as not to disturb them, Victor backed out of the hallway and closed the door, leaving them to their conversation. He walked back into the grand ballroom, a place that now felt alien and garish. He saw his son, Dmitri, standing alone by a window, staring out at the city lights, a man lost in his own private exile. Victor walked over and stood beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "She's talking to Orlov," Victor said finally, his voice a hollow whisper. I couldn't understand a word they were saying. Dmitri nodded, not surprised. "Of course you couldn't," he said, a note of bitter, self-aware irony in his voice. "We never learned to speak her language. We were too busy shouting in our own." The two men, the celebrated professor and the star surgeon, stood in silence. Two kings who had just discovered their magnificent kingdom was built on a fault line. They had spent their lives looking up at the stars, never realizing the most brilliant one was right beside them. And now that she had finally ascended, her light served only to illuminate the vast, empty darkness of their own failure. The conversation they needed to have was not with Anna. It was with themselves. And it would be a long and difficult and lifetime-in-the-making conversation indeed. The conversation in the service corridor was a timeless bubble, a pocket universe governed only by the laws of intellectual curiosity. For Anna, the grand ballroom with its politics and its ghosts had ceased to exist. There was only the rough texture of the plaster wall against her back, the faint scent of old wood, and the luminous, focused energy of the man sitting opposite her. Here, with Misha, she was not a symbol or a commodity. She was a thinker, a peer, an explorer returned from a long and solitary voyage, finally able to share the map of the new world she had discovered. She had filled the back of her invitation card and was now sketching on a paper napkin she'd found in her clutch, the pen flying across the flimsy surface. She was explaining the linchpin of her entire system, the elegant, counterintuitive way she had stabilized the synthetic RNA messenger, a feat that had eluded research teams for years. Everyone was trying to build a better shield, she explained, her hands moving as she spoke, shaping the ideas in the air. They were trying to armor the molecule to protect it from the body's natural enzymatic degradation. But that was the wrong approach. The more armor you add, the less efficient the payload delivery becomes. It was a paradox. "So you took a page from the enemy's book," Olaf interjected, his eyes gleaming with understanding. "You didn't build a shield. You built a disguise." "Exactly." Anna's face lit up with the pure joy of being truly understood. "I used a recursive algorithm to model the host's own cellular identification markers. I taught the molecule to lie. I made it whisper to the body's defenses, 'I am one of you. Let me pass.' It doesn't fight the system, it becomes invisible to it. It's biomimicry on a quantum level." "My God," Orlov breathed, shaking his head in slow, profound admiration. "That's not just genetics, Anyusha. That's poetry. You didn't just solve a problem in biology, you solved a problem in philosophy. The nature of identity, of self and other. It's beautiful." The word beautiful struck Anna with more force than any of the thunderous applause had. It was the highest praise one true scientist could give to another. It was a recognition not just of the result, but of the elegance and artistry of the thought process behind it. "That's what I tried to tell them," she said, a note of the evening's sadness creeping back into her voice. "That's what I could never make them understand. My father, he sees science as a collection of powerful, impressive facts. Dmitri sees it as a set of effective, life-saving tools. But they don't see the beauty. They don't see the music and the math." "That is because they are mechanics, my child," Orlov said gently. "They are skilled at operating the machine of the world as it is. But you are an engineer. You are one of the rare few who can redesign the machine itself. It is a different order of thinking. You cannot expect a mechanic to appreciate the blueprints for a new engine. They only know how to tune the old one." He leaned back, a weary but satisfied look on his face. "I knew it from the very beginning. Do you remember your first-year undergraduate seminar?" Anna smiled. The one where I argued with you for a full hour about the ethical fallacies in the Human Genome Project's public charter? The very one, Orlov chuckled. You were terrified. You were shaking like a leaf. The other students were either intimidated by you or thought you were completely insane. But I saw it then. You were not just learning the facts I was presenting. You were interrogating their very foundations. You were not looking at the what, you were demanding to know the why and the how. It's the rarest quality in a student. It is the one thing that cannot be taught. The spark. He reached out and patted her knee, his touch frail but firm. My only contribution to your genius, Anyusha, was to see that spark and to make sure the cynics and the mechanics didn't snuff it out. I gave you a little fuel, a little shelter from the wind. The fire was always yours. Tears pricked at the back of Anna's eyes. His validation was a gift, a final, necessary piece of armor she hadn't known she needed. He had not just been her mentor. He had been the keeper of her faith in herself, holding it in trust until she was strong enough to claim it. There is one more thing I need to know, Orlov said, his expression turning serious again. Now that the ghost is out of the machine, as you so eloquently put it, what will you do? The world will descend upon you now. Steiner and his ilk will not give up so easily. They will offer you everything. Fame, wealth beyond measure, power. And they will, in return, demand everything. They will try to own you, to brand you, to turn your beautiful science into a product. I know, Anna said, the weight of that future settling upon her again. Dr. Levin wants me to head a new, fully funded public-private research consortium. The senator wants me to chair a committee. Steiner wants to build me a kingdom. They all want a piece. And what do you want, Anna? Orlov asked, his gaze sharp and direct. It was the most important question of the night. Anna looked down at the napkin in her hands, at the scribbled equations that represented her soul's true language. What did she want? The answer was surprisingly, beautifully simple. I want to go back to the lab, she said, a quiet certainty in her voice. I want to finish the phase 1 human trials. There's a little girl in a hospital in Baltimore with Tay-Sachs disease. The models predict my therapy has a 98% chance of halting the disease progression. A 98% chance of saving her life. That's what I want. I want to see her first birthday. Everything else, all of this. She gestured vaguely toward the door, toward the glittering world beyond. It's just noise. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Orlov's face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated joy and relief. It was the smile of a teacher who sees a student has not just learned the lessons, but has surpassed them. That, he said, his voice thick with pride, is the correct answer. You have not just built a new science, my child. You have built a new kind of scientist. One with a moral compass as strong as her intellect. He pushed himself up from the stool, his old bones creaking in protest. I must go. My doctors will have my hide if I am not home before midnight. But there is something for you. He reached into his jacket pocket again and pulled out not a notebook, but a small, flat, velvet-covered box. This is not a prize from a foundation, he said, pressing it into her hand. This is from an old man who has had the profound privilege of watching a star being born. Anna opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded white satin, was a medal. It was not gold or flashy. It was made of a heavy, dark, gunmetal gray alloy, and it was worn with age. In the center was a simple, elegant engraving of a stylized tree, its roots and branches intertwined, a symbol of the deep connection between foundational knowledge and new growth. Around the edge were engraved the words, Lux in tenebris, light in the darkness. It was my own mentor's, Orlov explained softly. He was a geneticist who worked in secret in the Soviet Union, under the thumb of Lysenkoism, when the study of genetics was a political crime. He did his work at night, risking his freedom to pursue the truth. He called his small, hidden group of students the keepers of the spark. When I left for America, he gave me this medal. He told me to keep the spark alive, and to one day pass it on to a student who understood that true science must sometimes be done in the dark, for the sake of the light. He closed her fingers over the medal. Its weight was substantial, solid. It felt more real than the glittering award sitting on the lectern in the ballroom. You, more than anyone I have ever known, have earned it, Anyusha, he said. You have been a keeper of the spark in your own wilderness. You have tended a great fire in a deep and lonely darkness. Now, you must bring that light to the world. But never forget the lessons of the darkness. Never forget the quiet, the focus, the integrity that can only be found when no one else is watching. Tears were now streaming freely down Anna's face. She couldn't speak. She could only nod, clutching the medal in her hand. It was not an award. It was an inheritance. A passing of the torch. A sacred trust. Be well, my dear Anna, Orloff said. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to the top of her head, a gesture of pure, paternal love. Go and build your beautiful new world. And with that, he turned and walked slowly, painfully, down the service corridor and out another door, disappearing from her life as quietly as he had entered it. Anna sat there for a long time, the metal cool and heavy in her palm. The conversation with her mentor had given her the final piece she needed. It had not just validated her past, it had illuminated her future. She knew now what she had to do. The offers of kingdoms and committees were distractions. They were attempts to co-opt her work, to fit her into their existing structures of power. But her work did not fit. It was designed to break those structures. She stood up, her movements now filled with a new, calm sense of purpose. She smoothed down her simple blue dress, a garment that now felt less like armor and more like a uniform. She walked back to the oak door and stepped back into the world. The gala was in its final stages. People were beginning to leave, their faces filled with the singular, animating topic of the night. Her. She saw Dr. Levin across the room, fending off a still persistent Karl Steiner. She caught his eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Levin understood immediately. He excused himself from Steiner and began to make his way toward her. As he approached, she held up the medal Orloff had given her. I know what I want, she said, her voice clear and strong, leaving no room for argument. The public-private consortium, Levin began, a hopeful look on his face. The funding is practically guaranteed. We can have a press conference tomorrow. No, Anna interrupted gently but firmly. No consortium. No committees. No Ivanova institutes. Levin looked confused. But Anna, you can't go back to the way things were. You need resources, a team, protection. I need a lab, she said, and I need to be left alone to do my work. But the work itself, that can no longer be a secret. She closed her hand around the medal. Project Genesis will become an open-source platform. Levin stared at her as if she had just suggested they set fire to the treasury. Open source? Anna, do you have any idea what you're saying? The patents are worth billions, trillions even. You would be giving away the most valuable intellectual property in human history. Intellectual property is a cage, Anatoly, she countered, her voice resonating with the quiet wisdom of her mentor. It creates competition where there should be collaboration. It creates secrecy where there should be transparency. My goal is not to get rich. My goal is to cure diseases. And the fastest way to do that is to give the tools to every brilliant mind in the world who wants to help. We won't have a team of hundreds. We will have a team of hundreds of thousands. She looked him in the eye, her conviction absolute. We will establish a nonprofit foundation. The Foundation for Open Source Genetics. We will license the core technology for free to any university, any research hospital, any nonprofit lab in the world. We will only charge commercial licensing fees to for-profit companies like Steiner's. And all of that revenue will be funneled directly back into the foundation to fund new, independent research. We will not build a kingdom. We will build a commonwealth. Dr. Levin was speechless. The idea was audacious, radical, and completely unprecedented. It flew in the face of every established norm in science, business, and academia. It was financial suicide. And it was, he realized with a dawning sense of awe, utterly, breathtakingly brilliant. It was a solution as elegant and as unexpected as her science. A commonwealth, he repeated, the word tasting strange and wonderful. A slow smile spread across his face. My God, Anna, you really are going to change the world. We are, she corrected him gently. She looked across the room one last time at her father and brother. They were standing by the main entrance, preparing to leave, two lost souls about to step out into a world they no longer recognized. Their journey was just beginning, but so, she realized, was hers. She had stepped out of the darkness. And now, holding the legacy of her mentor in her hand, she was ready to share the light. The world Anna stepped into the next morning was not the same one she had inhabited the day before. The change was instantaneous and absolute. Her anonymity, the quiet cloak she had worn for her entire adult life, had not just been removed, it had been vaporized. She awoke in her small, Spartan apartment, a place chosen for its proximity to the Institute and its lack of distinguishing features, to the insistent buzz of her phone. It was a sound she rarely heard. She had less than a dozen contacts, and they all knew she preferred to communicate via encrypted email. She looked at the screen. Over 300 new text messages, thousands of emails, hundreds of missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Her personal contact information, a closely guarded secret for years, had clearly been leaked. She was no longer a private citizen. She was a public phenomenon. She ignored the phone and walked to her window. The street below, usually a quiet residential lane, was a chaotic swarm of activity. 3 satellite news vans were parked haphazardly on the curb, their large dishes pointed at her building like alien weaponry. A crowd of reporters and photographers was camped out on the sidewalk, their long-lensed cameras aimed at her window. A small cheer went up as they spotted her silhouette. The flash of cameras pulsed against the glass, a frantic, silent lightning storm. This was her new reality. She was a creature in a zoo, her quiet life now a public spectacle. A wave of something cold and sharp, like panic, washed over her. Orlov's warning echoed in her mind. Your anonymity is gone forever. She had understood the words intellectually, but she had not been prepared for the visceral, claustrophobic reality of them. She took a deep breath, forcing the panic down. She thought of the medal in her pocket, its cool weight a tangible reminder of her new purpose. She was no longer just Anna Ivanova. She was the custodian of a new idea, a new way of doing science. And that idea needed a champion, not a recluse. She turned away from the window and turned on the television, something she hadn't done in months. Her own face stared back at her from every channel. On a major news network, a panel of experts was dissecting her speech. A political pundit was hailing her as a new feminist icon, a symbol of female empowerment against a patriarchal establishment. A bioethicist was raising cautious but respectful concerns about the implications of her technology. A fawning business analyst was trying to calculate her net worth, his numbers growing more astronomical with each passing second. They were all creating their own narratives, projecting their own hopes and fears onto the blank canvas of her public persona. She switched the channel. A morning talk show had her father's university photograph on the screen next to her own candid shot from the gala. The host was narrating a dramatic, oversimplified version of their family story. A tale of a father who, blinded by his own ambition, failed to see the genius blossoming in his own home, the host declared with breathless excitement. It's a story of redemption, of a family torn apart by secrets, now facing a public reckoning. They were turning her life into a soap opera. The most jarring moment came when she switched to a financial news network. Carl Steiner was being interviewed live from the floor of the stock exchange. And what we witnessed last night, Steiner was saying, his face a mask of sincerity, was not just a scientific breakthrough, but a moral one. Dr. Ivanova's vision for an open-source, collaborative future for genetic research is a paradigm shift. And FarmCorp intends to be at the forefront of this new era. This morning, we are announcing the formation of the Genesis Collaborative Fund, a $5 billion initial investment to support nonprofit research based on Dr. Ivanova's platform. We are not seeking to own this technology. We are seeking to be its humble partner, its primary servant. Anna watched, a cold, clinical understanding dawning. Steiner was a master strategist. He had realized he could not own her, so he was trying to own her narrative. By publicly embracing her open-source model and positioning himself as its greatest champion and benefactor, he was attempting to become the gatekeeper of her revolution. He would control the fund, his board would decide which research to support. He was still trying to build a kingdom, but now he was calling it a republic and offering to be its first, very powerful president. The battle was not over. It had simply shifted to a new, more complex front. A sharp knock on her apartment door made her jump. It couldn't be the press. The main entrance to her building was secure. She walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Her brother, Dmitri, stood in the hallway. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face was pale and unshaven, and his eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He held a large, crumpled paper bag from a bakery. Hesitantly, Anna opened the door. "Anya," he said, his voice raspy. He couldn't meet her eyes. He thrust the bag toward her. I brought croissants. From that place you like." It was a peace offering, a pathetic, clumsy gesture from a man who had no idea how to even begin to atone. "Thank you, Dima," she said softly, taking the bag. He stood there, shifting his weight from foot to foot, a portrait of misery. "I saw the news vans," he said. It's a circus." "Yes. I resigned from the hospital this morning," he blurted out. Anna was genuinely shocked. "You what? Why?" He finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a self-loathing so profound it was painful to see. "The Ivanov Pavilion for Innovative Medicine," he said, the name tasting like poison in his mouth. "It's a monument built on a lie. My lie. I stood in front of the board and I told them the truth. Everything. That the research wasn't mine, that I took credit for your work. That the only innovation was the depth of my own arrogance. What did they say? Anna asked. The board was understanding, he said with a bitter laugh. They're more worried about the hospital's reputation now that I'm your brother. They asked me to take a leave of absence. But I can't. I can't walk those halls. I can't look my residents in the eye. Every success I've ever had, it feels fraudulent now. Tainted. He shook his head. The captain of the ship went down with his own pride. He looked at her, his eyes pleading. I don't know what to do, Anya. I've spent my whole life being Dr. Dmitry Ivanov, the brilliant surgeon. And now, I don't know who I am. Anna looked at her brother, at this man whose entire identity had been shattered, and felt a surge of compassion. His fall had been absolute. And perhaps, from this place of absolute ruin, he could begin to build something real. Maybe, she said gently, for the first time, you get to find out. Before Dmitry could respond, her father appeared at the end of the hallway, walking from the direction of the stairs. He, too, looked like a ghost of his former self. His usual, immaculate professorial attire was gone, replaced by a simple, rumpled sweater. He had aged a decade overnight. He stopped when he saw them, his face a complex mask of shame and uncertainty. Father, Anna said, her voice neutral. Anna, he acknowledged, his voice quiet. He looked from Anna to Dmitry, at the paper bag in her hands. I see you had the same idea. He was holding a small box of pastries from a different bakery. The two men in her life, both trying to apologize with carbohydrates. The absurdity of it was almost comical. I have also submitted my resignation to the university, Victor announced, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. This shocked Anna even more than Dmitry's news. You can't, she said. The university is your life. No, he corrected her, a profound sadness in his voice. The university was my stage, my identity. And I have discovered that my identity was built on a foundation of profound ignorance. I stood in front of students for 30 years and pontificated about the nature of the universe, while failing to understand the most significant person in my own home. What kind of intellectual authority is that? How can I presume to teach others about the pursuit of truth when I was so blind to the truth standing right in front of me? He looked at Anna, and for the first time, she saw not a professor or a father, but simply a man grappling with the enormity of his own failure. Your speech last night, he said, his voice cracking. You said your work was fueled by our dismissal, that our doubt was the engine of your success. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To know that your greatest legacy, the only thing of true, lasting value your name will ever be attached to, was created not because of you, but in spite of you? It is a condemnation from which there is no appeal. He stepped forward, his eyes pleading. I don't expect your forgiveness, Anna. I know I have not earned it. I don't even know what to ask for. I only know that I can no longer continue to be the man I was. That man was a fool. A proud, blind fool. He looked at his son, then back at his daughter. We have failed you. Spectacularly. And we will spend the rest of our lives living with that knowledge. The raw, unvarnished honesty of their confessions was overwhelming. This was not about making excuses or seeking absolution. This was about a complete and total surrender. They were two kings, abdicating their thrones, admitting their reigns had been a sham. The hallway was silent, save for the distant sound of the media circus outside. The three of them stood there, a broken family trying to find a new language, a new way of being. Anna knew this was a turning point. She could accept their resignations, let them retreat into their separate exiles of shame, and walk away, finally and completely free of them. Or she could offer them a different path. She thought of Orlov's medal, of the intertwined roots and branches. She thought of her plan for the foundation, for a commonwealth built on collaboration, not competition. Her vision was about building new things, not just tearing down old ones. Perhaps that applied to families as well. You're both being ridiculous, she said, her voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere with a surprising, practical sharpness. Both men looked at her, stunned. You, she said, pointing a finger at Dmitry. You are a brilliant surgeon. Your skills are real, even if your ego was inflated. People are alive today because of your hands. Resigning is a selfish act of self-pity. If you truly want to atone, you will swallow your pride, go back to that hospital, and dedicate your life to being the doctor you pretended to be. Not for the glory, but for the patients. And you will start by giving full, public credit to the research team whose work you used. Then she turned to her father. And you. You are one of the finest theoretical minds of your generation. You are a teacher. Resigning is an abdication of your responsibility. The world of science is about to be turned upside down by my work. They will need guides. They will need ethicists. They will need people with the wisdom to ask the hard questions. Your field may not be genetics, but your field is thinking. Go back to that university and teach them how to think. Teach them about the dangers of intellectual arrogance. Teach them, using yourself as the prime example, about the importance of listening. Turn your failure into your greatest lesson. She looked at the two of them, her voice softening, but losing none of its newfound authority. Both of you have spent your lives building your names. The Ivanov name. You thought it was about prestige, about success, about being on top. You were wrong. A name is not a crown. It's a responsibility. My work is about to make our name one of the most famous in the world. And I will not have it associated with two men who ran away and hid in a corner because they were ashamed. You will not resign. You will stay. You will work. And you will help me. Her final words hung in the air, an offer so unexpected, so generous, it was staggering. She was not just forgiving them, she was enlisting them. She was giving them a purpose, a path to redemption. Help you? Victor whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. How could we possibly help you? My foundation, Anna said, a plan forming in her mind, clear and bright. It will need a board of directors, an ethical oversight committee, a medical liaison. It will need people I can trust to ask the hard questions, to challenge me, to keep me honest. It will need people who understand, from bitter personal experience, the dangers of getting it wrong. She looked at her father, then her brother. A new family dynamic was being forged in that dingy hallway, built not on hierarchy or pride, but on a shared, painful understanding. The work is just beginning, she said, and I can't do it alone. The question is, are you ready to learn a new language? For the first time that morning, a flicker of something other than shame appeared in Victor Ivanov's eyes. It was a tiny, fragile spark of hope. The world had changed, his daughter was a titan, and he was a fallen king. But perhaps, just perhaps, she was offering him a new role. Not as a professor, not as a father in the way he had understood it, but as a student of his own daughter. And the prospect, as terrifying as it was also the first truly interesting idea he had encountered in a very long time. The week that followed was a blur of controlled chaos, a crucible in which Anna's new life was forged. The world, having discovered its new icon, was relentless in its desire to consume her. Paparazzi documented her every move, from buying groceries to entering the institute. Talk shows offered exorbitant sums for a tell-all interview. Her old university email account, which she had kept for sentimental reasons, had to be permanently deleted after it crashed from the influx of over 1 million new messages. She was no longer a person, she was a global event. Through it all, Anna moved with a quiet, unnerving calm. She had found her center in the dingy hallway of her apartment building, in the act of not just forgiving her family, but redefining their purpose. That decision had anchored her. She was no longer just reacting to the storm, she was directing its winds. She held her first and only press conference not in a sterile corporate boardroom or a grand university hall, but in the Institute's modest, well-worn auditorium where she had once defended her doctoral thesis. The room was packed to the rafters with journalists from every major news outlet in the world. She walked onto the stage not in a power suit, but in her simple lab coat over a plain gray sweater. She looked not like a titan of industry, but like what she was, a working scientist. Dr. Levin introduced her, and then Anna stepped to the podium. She did not read from a prepared statement. She spoke from the heart, her voice clear and steady. She laid out her vision for the Foundation for Open-Source Genetics with a clarity and passion that silenced the room. She spoke not of patents and profits, but of collaboration and cures. She explained that the core technology of Project Genesis would be made available, for free, to any nonprofit research entity that requested it. A discovery of this magnitude does not belong to one person, or one institution, or one country, she declared, her gaze sweeping across the sea of cameras. It belongs to humanity. The only way to solve the great challenges of human health is to harness the collective intelligence of our entire species. This is not my project anymore. It is yours. It is ours. Now let's get to work. The announcement sent shockwaves through the worlds of science, finance, and medicine. It was a radical act of intellectual philanthropy, a complete repudiation of the established order. Wall Street analysts were confounded. FarmCorp's stock dipped slightly as investors struggled to understand a world where the most valuable commodity in history was being given away. But in university labs and research hospitals around the globe, there was an explosion of hope and excitement. Anna had not just offered them a new tool, she had offered them a new philosophy. In the days that followed, the foundation began to take shape. True to her word, Anna assembled the most unorthodox board of directors imaginable. Dr. Levin was there, representing the institutional rigor of the NRI. Professor Orloff, despite his frail health, agreed to serve as the foundation's moral compass, attending meetings via video call from his study, his sharp mind a constant, guiding presence. And then there were the other two board members. Dmitry Ivanov took the role of medical liaison. He had, as Anna had commanded, gone back to the hospital. His public confession and apology for taking credit for her research had become a news story in its own right. He had faced a disciplinary committee and had been temporarily suspended from his surgical duties, but his genuine remorse and his sister's public support had saved his career. He was now a humbler man. He spent his days not in the operating room, but liaising with clinical teams around the world, helping them understand and implement the geneticist protocols for their own patients. He no longer projected an aura of control, he projected an aura of service. He was, for the first time, using his skills not to build his own name, but to amplify her work. And the head of the Ethical Oversight Committee was, to the astonishment of many, Professor Viktor Ivanov. He had not resigned. He had gone back to the university and given the most difficult lecture of his life. In front of a packed auditorium, he had told the story of his own blindness, using his relationship with his daughter as a case study in intellectual arrogance and confirmation bias. The lecture had become legendary on campus, a searing, brilliant, and deeply human lesson on the true nature of the scientific method. As head of the ethics committee, his role was not to provide answers, but to ask the hard questions. He, who had been so certain, was now the Foundation's official, designated skeptic. He was the voice of caution, the constant reminder of the unforeseen consequences of unchecked power. It was a role he was uniquely, painfully qualified for. Their first board meeting was held not in a fancy conference room, but around the worn-out table in Anna's own lab. The croissants were from the bakery Dmitry had brought that fateful morning. The coffee was brewed by Victor. The dynamic was new, fragile, but real. They were not just a family. They were now colleagues, united by a shared, world-changing purpose. The true genesis, Anna realized, was not the technology. It was this. It was the remaking of relationships, the rebuilding of trust from a place of ruin. It was the transformation of her family's greatest failure into its most profound strength. A month after the gala, Anna was where she was happiest, back in her lab, late at night. The noise of the outside world had faded. The Foundation, under the capable hands of Levin and her family, was handling the deluge, leaving her free to do what only she could do. She was monitoring the real-time data feed from the hospital in Baltimore. The screen displayed the vital signs and cellular response of a single patient, a 10-month-old girl named Sarah, the first human recipient of the geneticist therapy. For 3 weeks, Anna had watched the data, her heart in her throat. The therapy had been administered, and now it was a waiting game, a silent, microscopic battle being waged in the cells of a child she had never met. The hum of the servers was a quiet mantra. She watched the lines on the graph, the numbers that represented the degradation of the faulty proteins, the slow, steady rise of the healthy ones. The curve was tracking perfectly with her most optimistic projections. The therapy was not just halting the disease, it was reversing it. A chime from her computer signaled an incoming video call. It was the head of the pediatric neurology unit in Baltimore. A kind-faced woman with tired, hopeful eyes appeared on the screen. Dr. Ivanova, the woman said, her voice thick with an emotion she was struggling to contain. I thought you would want to see this. She turned her laptop around. The camera was now pointed at a hospital crib. In it, little Sarah was not lying listlessly as she had been for weeks. She was sitting up. She was holding a brightly colored plastic ring in her hand, her movements clumsy but deliberate. Then, she looked toward the camera, and, for the first time in her short, difficult life, she smiled. It was a wide, gummy, and utterly beautiful smile. Her neural functions are almost completely restored, the doctor said, her voice breaking. Her parents are. Well, you can imagine. You did it, Dr. Ivanova. My God, you actually did it. Anna stared at the image of the smiling child, and the last of the walls around her own heart dissolved. The years of loneliness, the pain of her family's dismissal, the chaos of the last month, all of it faded into insignificance. This was the point. This was the why. This single, precious, miraculous smile. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of sadness or of triumph. They were tears of pure, unadulterated grace. She had not just solved an equation. She had saved a life. She ended the call and leaned back in her chair, looking around the quiet, humming sanctuary of her lab. This was her kingdom, not a kingdom of power or of wealth, but a kingdom of quiet, life-altering purpose. Her personal phone, which she now kept on her desk, buzzed with a new text message. It was from a group chat she had reluctantly agreed to join. The chat was titled, Ivanov Board Meeting. The message was from her father. It was a link to a news article about a research team in Brazil using her open-source platform to develop a potential cure for sickle cell anemia. Underneath the link, he had written, "Their methodology seems sound, but have we considered the potential long-term impact on germline integrity? We should discuss." A moment later, a message from Dmitry appeared. "I've already reached out to their clinical lead, setting up a video conference for tomorrow to share our data from the Tay-Sachs trial. Let's collaborate." Anna smiled through her tears. The mechanics were learning to be engineers. The captain was learning to ask for directions. The family was learning to speak a new language. She looked from the text chain on her phone to the image of the smiling child still on her main monitor. The threads were all coming together. The science, the family, the future, the personal, and the universal had finally merged. She typed a simple reply into the group chat. "Excellent points. I'll run the simulations tonight. Talk tomorrow." She turned back to her work, the hum of the servers a comforting lullaby. The world outside would continue to call her a hero, a titan, a ghost, a legend. They would continue to write their stories about her. But she knew who she was. She was a scientist in her lab. She was a daughter and a sister in a family that was healing. She was the keeper of a sacred spark. And her work, the real work, the beautiful, quiet, life-giving work, was just beginning. It was a new day, a new genesis. And for the first time, she was not facing it alone.